Fear wasn't something he was used to. Sure, he'd been scared at times, but never had he felt fear like he did when he saw that sword in the air. Knowing he'd not make it, or that Ghost wouldn't make it, had almost brought him to his knees, only for the fire to rise up inside him. The warging was instant, and before he knew it, he was looking down at Margaery's face, her fear matching his own. Stopping the sword took everything he had, and even feeling the man's pain as Ghost bit into his arm wasn't enough to force him out of him. Only the sound of the sword falling did that. As he held her and told her that he was there, he turned her away so she didn't have to look at the man on the ground. For him, though there was another reason other than to protect her from the view, he wanted to see the man die. Ghost biting into his neck and the blood squirting from it made an even more gruesome sight next to the severed arm. When Jaime, Arthur, and the others arrived, Jay began to move with Margaery only for the gold cloaks to arrive at the same time. He watched as they looked from him to Ghost, from Margaery to the bodies on the ground, and he prayed they'd not try to stop him from leaving. Unfortunately, he was not so lucky, and despite the fact that he was more concerned about his wife, he felt his anger rise as the gold cloak stepped forward. "You need to explain this. You both have to come with us," the man said, looking to him, and Jay felt Margaery lean even more into him. "You do not want to interfere with me." Jay set his mouth tight and his eyes full of anger as he glared at the man. "I need you to come with me." The gold cloak said, reaching out his hand to stop him. "Get away from me now," Jay said as he moved past him, and whether it was the tone he used it or the fact that Ghost, whose mouth was covered in blood, was snarling at the man, Jay watched as he moved away. Behind him, he heard Jaime speak to the leader of the group of gold cloaks, and so he, Margaery, Arthur, and Walder all moved down the street, Ghost walking alongside him for added protection, all the way back to the manse. Margaery stayed silent, her head tucked in close to his chest as his arms never left her. Upon reaching the Tyrell manse, he saw the guards come rushing back, both of them quickly stopping when he looked at them. "Damon, find out what happened from them," he said. And Arthur nodded as he walked through the gate. "Sam," Margaery said softly beside him. "What's that, my love?" he said as she looked to him. "He killed Sam," she said, and Jay just held her tightly before they moved to the door. "I'm so sorry, Marge," he said as he saw Willis come towards him, the cane hitting the ground rapidly as he moved far too fast for a man with a limp. "What happened, Marge, John? What happened?" Willis asked worriedly. "I think you should find your grandmother and your mother. She's unharmed, Willis, but there was an attack. Find them and we'll speak," he said, and Willis nodded. He led her to her room and called for the servants to fetch some water so he could clean the blood from Ghost's fur, knowing how the wolf must look to those around them. Once inside the room, he felt her throw both arms around him, and she began to cry in earnest, Jay standing there and letting her sob against his chest. Lifting her into his arms, he carried her to her bed and lay her down, Margaery turning from him and facing the wall. He stroked her hair and felt her breathing begin to calm, and he whispered that she was safe and that he'd never allow anyone to harm her, promising her. He then closed his eyes and prayed to the old god to help him hold this promise true. Olenna and Willis were the first to arrive, and Jay prepared himself for the questions. "What happened? Is my granddaughter hurt?" "What?" Olenna said, her concern clear, and Jay felt Margaery shiver against his hand. "She's unharmed, Lady Olenna, but perhaps she needs something to help her rest?" he asked and hoped she could read his eyes, something that she must have been able to do as she sent for some dream wine a moment later. Jay could see she wished to sit down and be with Margaery, but when he went to move away, he felt his wife grab his hand, and so he looked once again to Olenna, who nodded. Instead, he moved up the bed some, his hand still on his wife's back, and this allowed for Olenna to sit down and be close to her also. When the servant came back with the dream wine, Jay watched as Willis mixed it with some berry juice and then handed him the glass. "Marge, you should drink," he said, and she turned her head from the wall and looked up to him, her eyes red from where she'd been crying. "Please, for me." She took the glass from him and drank it down, and he leaned forward and kissed her softly on the cheek, watching as she turned back to face the wall once more. Thankfully, by the time Ellery and Mace arrived, she was asleep, and Mace's loud proclamations were shut down by Olenna before they could wake her. "What happened to my daughter? I'll see this whole city ransacked to find those responsible," Mace said loudly. "Oh, please shut up, Mace. Let her sleep. She needs it," Olenna said and looked to him. "I don't wish to risk not being here when she awakens, my lady. Perhaps we could speak away from the bed?" Jay said, and Olenna had the servants prepare some chairs for them to sit on. Jay looked at Ghost in the water, and saw Ellery look to the wolf too, her face crinkling up when she saw the blood, and he wished he'd had time to clean it. Moving his hand from Margaery's back, he stood up and walked with Olenna to the chair, watching as she bid them all sit. "What happened, John?" Olenna asked as soon as they sat down. "I was in the gardens of the manse, my lady, when I felt something wrong. I, Lord Jaime, Ser Damon, and Sirs Walder and George left, and when we found Margaery, one of her guards had been attacked, and a man seemed ready to attack her," Jay said, and looked to Olenna, trying to say he'd tell her more when they were alone. "Who was this man? Who was this man? Where is he?" "I'll have his damn head for this," Mace said loudly, Ellery taking her husband's hand in her own. "The man is dead. My lord, it seems we arrived just in time, and Lady Margaery was unharmed physically, though she did see one of her guards killed and the man ready to attack her." "One of her guards? Where were the others?" Olenna asked. "I do not know, my lady. As we arrived back here, 2 guards came running. I've asked Sir Damon to speak to them. The one who died was called Sam, I believe." "Franklin's boy," Ellery said sadly. "Where were the damn gold cloaks?" Mace said angrily. "They arrived later, my lord. They wished to speak to me and to Lady Margaery, but I put them off for now." "Thank you, Sir John, for everything," Ellery said, and Mace nodded. "Aye. This has rattled Lady Margaery badly, my lady. On. He way back here. I think it's for the best if I'm here when she awakens, just so she doesn't feel any worse than she already does." "I don't think," Mace began. "I think that's an excellent idea, Sir John. Far better she awakens to the face of the man who brought her here than thinks she's been abandoned," Ellery said with a smile. "My love, it's not proper," Mace said. "I would, of course, not be alone with Lady Margaery, my lord, at any time," he said, and saw Mace look to his mother and then his wife before finally nodding to him. As the Tyrells got up to walk to Margaery, Jay leaned in to whisper to Olenna, telling her he was going to speak to Arthur and that he'd explain further a little later on about what he found out and what he had left out. Walking to the door, he looked at Ghost, who sat down, and then he walked out to speak to Arthur, needing to find out who this man was and who sent him. King's Landing, 297 AC. John Aaron. He never liked tourneys, and yet he had been looking forward to this one. The Lannisters had suffered a setback in Essos, thanks to Illyrio. Here they and the Tyrells would be humbled a little, and so he had hoped to enjoy it. Yet right from the very start of it, things had begun to go wrong. Firstly, there was the removal of Viserys' head, and the replacement that had been left in its stead. Even now, he still wasn't sure which had bothered Robert more, though he was fixated on the idea that he had Dragonspawn supporters in his midst. Then, there was Jon Snow, somehow convincing his fool of a foster son to allow a prince of the realm to squire for a damn bastard. Nothing he or the queen could say was enough to change his mind. Not only was it Ned's boy, and by the 7 did he hate that phrase, but also the bastard had piqued the king's interest with a wager. That he'd also once again managed to win a fight in front of Robert, and then given credit to the prince, only making Jon's job that much harder. Added to his annoyance over things was the fact that his wife and good sister seemed to be engaged in some silent war, and that Illyrio had departed abruptly. Were it not for the letter his man had brought to him and Lomas confirming he'd left on his ship, Jon would have worried about their benefactor. With how important he now was to the realm, the last thing they could afford was him to abandon them. Shaking his head, he almost laughed. Illyrio had proved himself a true friend of the crown, and he was worrying over nothing, my lord. Maester Gorman said as he took his seat at the table, Jon waiting for the rest to arrive so he could get this meeting over and done with. Grand Maester, he said with a nod. Soon Stannis, Petter, Renly, and Lomas arrived, and then even Jon was stunned when the king arrived also, Robert strolling in and seeming far happier than he'd seen him in days. Your Grace? He said, and was annoyed when Robert laughed. What is it, Jon? Surprised to see me here, I came at Lomas's request, the king said, and Jon looked to the Master of Whisperers. Forgive me, my lord. I had hoped to speak to you, but his grace asked me to keep him informed on this. Very well, Lomas. Please don't let me stop you, Jon said, looking at the larger man. As per his grace's instructions, I've been looking into the theft of Viserys Targaryen's head. Lomas began. Fucking dragonspawn, it's not just his fucking head now, is it? Robert said. No, your grace. We've not been able to recover his body either. Ha! At least the fucking thing raced through the streets. Robert laughed. Indeed, your grace. As I was saying, I've been looking into this, and I'm certain now that it's the work of the Whispering Skull. Lomas said, and Robert looked at him. The Whispering, what now? Robert asked. The Whispering Skull, your grace. Someone I've begun to come across more and more. Someone in the same line as work as myself. Lomas said. You're telling me there is another Master of Whisperers working in my kingdom? Robert asked angrily. I believe so, your grace, though who he's working for or what his goal is, I cannot say. Then what the fuck can you say? Robert asked as he took a swallow of his wine. That I believe this man to be responsible for the theft of Viserys' head and body. That he is also responsible for the White Stag being placed in its place, among other things. What other things? Renly asked. I believe this man may have been behind the deaths of Grand Maester Pycelle, some, if not all, of the other maesters and Lord Varys. Lomas said to gasps, though Peter chuckled. Is he also responsible for his grace's victory on the Trident as well? Sir Lomas, really, I think you give this man far too much credit. Even were he to exist, how could he do such things? Petter asked, and Jon nodded, looking to his friend. I believe he's a faceless man, Lord Baelish. Lomas said, and then Peter's smile left his face. What evidence do you have of this? Stannis asked, though a knock on the door stopped Lomas from answering. Your Grace, my lords, forgive me, Sir Jocelyn wishes to speak to you, Sir Preston said, popping his head into the room. Tell him to wait his fucking turn, Robert said, and Jon looked on as Sir Preston moved to do so. Your Grace, if Sir Jocelyn is willing to interrupt this meeting, then he must carry news of great import, Jon said, and reluctantly Robert nodded, and Sir Jacelyn Bywater stepped into the room and stood in front of the table. Sir Jocelyn? Jon asked. Your Grace, Lord Hand, forgive my interruption. There's been an attack, Your Grace, on Lady Margaery Tyrell. A man killed one of her guards and attempted to kill Lady Margaery. Sir Jocelyn said. Is the lady harmed, sir? Peter asked. No, my lord. Apparently Sir Jon Snow and the White Wolf arrived as the attack was occurring. Is Ned's lad hurt? Robert asked concernedly. Wah! No, your grace. He and the wolf were unharmed, though he refused me leave to question him or the lady, Lord Jaime informing me that he'd see Sir Jon to me once Lady Margaery was situated. Where is Sir Jon now? Stannis asked. He left with Lady Margaery, my lord. He and the wolf, along with his guards, escorted her back to her family. Sir Jacelyn replied, A true knight indeed. Renly japed, receiving a glare from Robert. A lad doing a knight's duty, living up to the oath. Would there were more like him. Robert said, smiling before he glared at Renly once again. The man who carried out the attack. Do we have any idea who he is, Sir Jacelyn? Stannis asked. No, my lord. The man himself was killed during the attack. Very well, sir. Keep us informed, Jon said, and the knight bowed and left. He found himself resisting the urge to laugh. The Tyrells had enemies other than he, it would seem, and he wondered who they were, and could common ground be found. A part of him almost wishing the lady had fallen, or that Sir Jon had, or even both, and he found himself looking around the table to where Sir Lomas sat. Find out who was behind this attack, Sir Lomas. We can't have daughters of great houses attacked, especially not during his grace's tourney, Jon said, and Robert gave him a quick nod. Truth be told, he cared not about who attacked the Golden Rose, only that he'd no doubt soon be visited by the fat oaf demanding some sort of justice. As if the life of the attacker wasn't justice enough, he bemoaned the fact that Jon Snow was far too much a favorite of the king. If he had not been, then perhaps there was some way he could use his actions here against him. Though he knew that was a forlorn hope. The king, like his son, falling for the idea of a bastard knight. King's Landing, 297 AC, Sansa. She and Robb, along with Grey Wind and Fang, walked to the Red Keep. Sansa worrying about what her mother may say. It had taken her mere moments the night before to disparage Jon, to blame him for wrongs that he'd not done or would ever conceive of, running him down for his actions in the melee, in the throne room, and in the feast itself, and Sansa trying to figure out what it was her mother saw. Had that not been enough to almost ruin her night? The run-in with Lord Baelish would have. Sansa, remembering how Fang and Ghost had reacted, and how that had informed her view on the man. It didn't take long for him to reinforce that view either, doing her mother's bidding even if he diverted from it part of the way through. She saw easily what he was doing, and it was laughable that he thought she'd fall for it. Come to speak to her on her mother's request, and then sympathize with her and claim he felt different than she did. There was a time when she didn't understand what people were truly like, and when she couldn't see the lies in the words they spoke. The wolves could. Jon was right about that. They knew even if she did not. But her years with Margaery and Olenna and the time she spent with Willis, all had combined to give her insight too. As they got closer, she felt herself smiling as she thought of Willis, of how he had held her hand and been there for her once again. Sansa, Robb said from beside her. What? You're smiling, he said, looking at her curiously. Wow, you really are observant, she said, rolling her eyes and giggling. I am. It's good to see. What is? She asked. You smiling? He said, and she smiled some more as they walked into the Tower of the Hand. They were no sooner inside than they saw Summer sitting forlornly in the corner, the wolf running to his brother and sister when he saw them. Bran is here? Ran is here, she said, and Robb looked to the guard. My brother, that's his wolf. Is he here? I believe he broke his fast with Lady Lysa and Lord Robert, as well as the lady's brother, sister, and uncle, my lord, the guard said. Very well, Robb said, and they moved to go up the steps, the guard stepping forward before looking at them both. Lady Lysa doesn't wish the wolves too close to Lord Robert, my lord. The wolves are friendly. Surely she'd not refuse, Sansa said. But the guard shook his head, and so they reluctantly left the wolves with Summer, though she thought the other wolf looked much happier now. They made their way up the stairs and were shown to a large door and then led inside. Sitting at the table was her mother, uncle, aunt, granduncle, and Bran, all of whom looked to them, Sansa, Robb. Her mother said, frowning and then smiling a moment later. Mother, we came to join you if you'd like, Sansa said, and her mother's smile was far truer as she bid them both sit. Aunt Lysa, Uncle Edmure, Uncle Brynden, Robb said, nodding to their relatives, and Sansa was glad he addressed them, as she wasn't sure what to call their granduncle. It's good to see you, nephew, you too, niece, Edmure said. You too, uncle. Sansa said, giving him her best smile. The rest of the meal was a bit stilted, making Sansa wonder if they'd interrupted some discussion or other. She noticed how her granduncle barely spoke to her mother or her uncle and aunt, instead seeming to both be listening any time they spoke to Bran and now talking to Robb. Bran, on the other hand, was speaking animatedly, telling her as well as the others about his duties as a squire and how much he was enjoying it. It was Lysa who left first, and she was followed by Edmure, leaving Bran and her granduncle to stay with her, Robb, and her mother. Looking to her granduncle once more, she smiled at him and got one in return, but the impression she was forming was, had they not arrived, then he and Bran would have been gone from the room by now, something that they were but a few moments later, the Blackfish telling Bran they needed to make sure the horses and lances were ready for the jousts. "I'll see you later, Sansa," Bran said as he walked over to her, Sansa giving him a hug before he left. "Aye, later, little brother," she whispered before he went and said his goodbyes to Robb and their mother. Once they were gone, there was silence for a bit as the servants cleared the table before their mother brought them to sit with her near the window. How they were going to start this was something neither she and Robb had discussed, and she began to think that perhaps her mother wouldn't even bring Jon up. She was wrong about that. And almost as soon as they were sitting down together, she did, among other things which soon had her annoyed. "I'm sorry about last night, Sansa, about upsetting you, but you must know the truth. I'm your mother. My job is to protect you." "I know, Mother. Last night I was just not ready to hear it," she said, and saw her mother look to her in surprise. "Hear what?" Robb said, and Sansa had to admire his mummery. Had she not known better, she'd have thought they'd not even spoken. Such was how he now looked at their mother. "About Jon," Sansa said sadly. "I know you care for your half-brother Sansa. You too, Robb, but you're not privy to the same things I am. You don't see or hear what I hear about him." "Jon's been good to us, Mother," Robb said with half a sigh, and Sansa saw her mother's eyes light up. "He has. But have you ever truly asked the reason why, Robb? You too, Sansa. Look beyond what you think is the reason. Have you ever asked yourselves why?" "Because he's our brother, Mother," Sansa said, with far less surety than she truly felt. "Is that the only reason? Look at the melee, Robb. Where was he when you were being attacked?" "Nowhere," Robb said, shaking his head. "Exactly. He was more concerned with himself, more concerned with his own glory, even if it meant you had to fall. That's what I've been trying to show you both, his claim to care for you. It's an act. Last night he questioned me, about you and Lord Baelish, what we spoke of and where I'd gone. It was most strange, Mother," Sansa said, and her mother nodded. "That's exactly what I worried about. He's trying to find out things to use against us, against you both." "But why, Mother? He'd not be able to take Winterfell. How could he?" Robb said, and Sansa almost grimaced, thinking her brother had gone too far too soon. Would he not, with the prince's ear, would he not? "The prince's ear?" she asked with a look of confusion on her face, not hearing her mother use this reasoning before. "Prince Tommen is his squire now?" "Sansa, what if he becomes as friendly with him as he does with everyone else? Uses him to rise as he has the Lannisters and the Tyrells?" her mother said, shaking her head. I don't know," she said, looking to the ground. With the support of a prince, he could have him back him over Robb for Winterfell, with the Tyrells and Lannisters also, even with the Manderleys, Robb, her mother said, looking to her brother. "Lord Wyman would never. I'm to marry his daughter, Mother," Robb said determinedly. Perhaps that's been the plan all the while. Lord Wyman gets you for a good son even though you deserve a more suitable bride, someone more suiting your station. Winifred is a suitable bride, Mother. She's most suitable," Robb said, looking to her, and she knew she had to intervene before her brother lost his composure, though it surprised her that their mother couldn't see it. "I think what Mother means is that as Warden of the North, your options were higher even than Lady Winifred, Robb, not to disparage the lady herself." she said, and saw her mother nod and smile at her, something which annoyed her immensely. That's exactly what I meant, Sansa. The princess or Lady Margaery. A lady of a great house is more suitable to the Lord of Winterfell than a bannerman's daughter. That was why your father and I were wed. Her mother said proudly, and Sansa had to look away, now knowing the real reason for their wedding. What are we to do then, mother? If what you say is true, and I fear it may be, what are we to do about it? Robb said, shrugging. Nothing. Leave it to me. I'll see the bastard brought to task, her mother said gleefully. Mother, Sansa admonished. I'm sorry, Sansa. I know how you think you feel about him, but you need to understand he's not your blood, not truly, and he doesn't feel the same about you as he's tricked you into feeling about him, her mother said, and Sansa looked to Robb as this time it was her, on the verge of losing her composure. Tricked us? Robb asked. To further his own ends, he's made you think he cares, and you being the true and good children that you are, you have in turn cared for him. But it's a lie. Robb, Sansa, it's a lie, you must believe me, her mother pleaded. What will you do? Sansa said. As she swore, her mother looked on the verge of either tears or laughing loudly, as she wasn't sure which it would be. I'll take care of him. I'll see it done right this time, her mother said. Sansa felt the rage rise to the surface, her anger ready to boil over, and all her efforts to hold it in failed her. What did you do, mother? She said angrily. What did you do? What do you mean this time you'll see it done right? What did you do? She shouted as she rose to her feet. Sansa E. No. Enough of this mummery. What did you do to my brother? Answer me, she said, and she watched as Robb looked to her and then their mother, as his face changed while he tried to figure out her anger. Sansa, please, her mother pleaded. No, answer me. Tell me the truth for once in my life. What did you do to my brother? She asked, as she glowered at her mother and balled her hands into fists. The door opened, and the guards came running in. Robb and she both looking in shock at the sheer number of them, and the fact that Walder was among them. As Greywind and Fang too both came in, Sansa looked on as both wolves growled at her mother, and as she took a step forward she heard Walder speak. Lady Sansa, Lord Robb, both of you must come with me now. Sir John has asked me to see you both to the manse. Please, we must not dally, Walder said, and she saw Robb look from their mother to her. Sir Walder, has something happened?
Why?
She asked worriedly. Please, Lady Sansa, come with me. I'll explain on the way, but we must leave now, Walder said. Looking to Robb, she nodded to him and her brother walked towards her, only Sansa taking a glance back at her mother as they left. She wished to continue their conversation and felt, had she more time, then she'd get to the bottom of what it was her mother had done. Though the twisting of her stomach told her she didn't truly wish to, and so instead she reached out to Fang to try and see what the wolf was feeling. Very quickly she could feel the wolf's disdain for her mother, and she found it matched her own at the moment. As they walked down the stairs, she saw the hands guards look to them, and once outside she was stunned by just how many guards Jon had actually sent for them. Climbing into the carriage beside her brother, she was glad to see Cregan sitting there, and as soon as they were inside, the carriage began to move. What happened? Did someone find out about Jon? She asked, and Cregan shook his head. No, a man attacked Margaery. She's unharmed, but someone tried to kill her, Sansa, Cregan said, and Sansa gasped as she looked to her brother, both of them thinking the same thing, and Sansa hoping for her mother's sake that she had nothing to do with this. King's Landing. 297 AC. Olenna, waiting to find out exactly what happened, was almost more than she could take. That her granddaughter was unharmed was a huge relief. That someone had dared to attack her and had gotten close enough to kill one of her guards was not. Olenna looked at Margaery as she lay there, Allery and Mace both hovering over her, and she felt her breath itch more than once. When the door opened, she saw Loras rush in and almost push his mother and father out of the way, her grandson leaning down to check his sister was unharmed. He then looked around the room to see where Jon was and looked to her confused. only for John to walk in a moment later. Loras then, looking at John and seeming to check that he too was unharmed before he relaxed. John signaled to them to follow him, and she, Willis, and Loras all walked from the room and into the one next to it, her room. And she was glad of that as she sat down at her own desk. Willis and Loras both taking a seat, though John did not, instead pacing for a bit before he leaned against the wall and closed his eyes. Olenna watched as he seemed to breathe deeply before he opened them and looked to them all. "Forgive me, Olenna. I find my temper is frayed, and it would do no one any good for me to lose it suddenly," John said. And she almost smiled at him for that he cared so much for Margaery that he was still now on the verge of losing control. "It's quite all right, John. Please sit," she said, and he did, and she looked on as Willis gave him a glass of water which he drained down in one go. "According to the guards, Olenna, Margaery decided to come and visit me at the manse as she wished me to accompany her when she visited the orphanages later. Given that both manses are close to each other, she decided to walk, and along the way she stopped to give some coppers to some children, at which point a man stole her purse and the 2 guards chased after him, leaving her with Sam," John said, and she could see he was on the verge of losing his temper once again, something she too was close to. "They left her alone with one guard?" Willis asked. "They did, Willis. From that point until I arrived, I can only hazard a guess as to what happened. I assumed the man killed Sam, and when I saw them, he had his sword raised, ready to bring down on. Bring down on." Olenna nodded to Willis, who filled another glass, and she watched as John shook his head before he looked to her. "How did you know, John? What reason did you have to suspect something was amiss?" Willis asked when John seemed ready to speak. "I don't know, Willis. Myself and Lord Jamie had been sparring, and we were discussing the events of the melee, and I felt ghosts in my head. I felt danger, and I ran and just came upon them," John said. "Accidentally? You came upon them accidentally?" Willis asked, and she was glad her grandson was calm enough to ask questions as she was finding herself not. "No, I was directed there. Willis, it's hard to explain. I felt ghosts telling me there was danger, and though I didn't know where I was going, I didn't run randomly." "The man who attacked Margaery, John, what happened when you got there?" Loras asked. "I saw him and I knew I was too far away, that I wouldn't make it, that Ghost wouldn't make it. I had to do something, anything, and so I warned him," John said, and Olenna found herself looking to him. "Like with the mountain?" Laura said, and she looked to her grandson in shock. He had known that John could do something like this, that he could warg into a person. "No, this was more deliberate, more controlled," John said, and Loras nodded. "I warged in and stopped the sword, stopped it from falling, and then Ghost did the rest." "The rest?" she asked. "He suffered, Olenna. Trust me, he suffered." "Who was he, John? And why did he target my granddaughter?" she asked angrily. "I don't know. I've sent for Richard and I'll find out, but this wasn't random. This was planned. He was no mere thief or cutthroat. This was something else," John said. It was later that night that Richard arrived, and John had stayed with her and Margaery until then. Mace had gone with Willis and Loras to speak to the gold cloaks, more to get him away from the room than for any hope he'd find anything. That it allowed her to speak to John on other matters was a distraction, if nothing else. "Tarly, John. I know, Olenna. I saw the chance to bring him in and took it. Had I beat him then, he'd have borne a grudge against me later. Now knowing the truth, it lets him know he lost to a king," he said. And she looked at him. "How did you let him know?" she asked. "I sang," John said, and she chuckled. "How did you leave it with him?" "I gave him enough to know I'm my father's son, told him of Richard, and that he'd be in touch." Olenna smiling as she watched him move Margaery's hair from her face. "Have him do it here, I'll see. Tarly brought in, but I wish to be present at the meeting," she said. And John nodded. "I almost lost her. Had I been, If I was just a moment, gods, when I fucking find the people responsible, I'll fucking see them burn. We both will, she said as she reached out and touched his hand. They sat there and watched as Margaery slept, Alarie coming in with some tea which she was surprised Jon drank, all three of them sitting silently and just looking at the bed. When Richard came by, Margaery still hadn't awoken, so she, Jon, and Sir Arthur walked to her solar to speak to him, Willis soon joining them while Loras went to Marjorie's room. She was surprised to see Lord Jaime there, though not with how Jon walked straight to him, the Lord reaching out to make sure Jon was doing well. "What have you found out?" Jon asked, and Richard began to tell them all that he knew. The man who tried to kill Margaery was Sir Gerald Dane, the Dark Star,
Richard said, and both she and Jon looked to Arthur,
who seemed to have already been told the news. Why would Arthur's cousin attack Margaery? Jon asked, confused. My cousin was always a law unto himself, Jon. Alaric would tell me of how he wished to take my place and how he wanted to be known as the best swordsman in the realm. But all knew that his reputation would never allow him to wield Dawn, even were I not alive, Arthur said. I don't understand. Why would he wish to harm Margaery? Jon said, and while they spoke, Olenna found herself tuning them out. Her mind, though, was already making the leaps. Margaery and Jon were married. She was in all but name his queen, and would be once he took the crown. Doran, like she did, wished his blood on the throne, and a Dornishman had tried to kill her granddaughter. That this was blatant and stupid could perhaps be put down to the man who made the attempt. That he made the attempt at all could in her mind only be laid at the feet of one man, Doran Martell. And if Jon didn't see him burn, she would. King's Landing. 297 AC, Sir Barristan. He walked from White Sword Tower to collect the prince and to make ready for the day ahead, not knowing what kind of a day it would be. The joust was now starting under a cloud, and Barristan was unsure if his king would compete at all. That someone had attacked Lady Margaery in the city stunned him, as did finding out who it was, though seeing the body and what had been done to it had not. Barristan knew some of Jon's and the Starks' connection with the wolves. While he didn't understand warging fully, it had been explained to him. Knowing that, and that Jon had arrived as the attack was taking place, when he and Arthur had looked at the body, he had known that the wolf was acting on its owner's regard. Walking into Maegor's holdfast, he made his way to the royal apartments and saw Sir Richard, Sir Preston, Sir Mandon, and Sir Jousting waiting for each of their charges. Lord Commander, they've just finished, Sir Richard said. Very good, sir. I want more men with the king today. Sir Aerys will be along to join you, Sir Preston. Barristan said, and the knight nodded. Very good, Lord Commander. Don't allow them to much freedom today, sirs. With what happened with Lady Margaery, I want you all to be on high alert, he said. And the four knights nodded. After a few moments waiting, it was Prince Tommen who came out first, and nodding to the other Kingsguard, Barristan walked away with the prince beside him. They were supposed to meet Jon and the others in the stables. And as he walked, he couldn't help but wonder if he'd show, a part of him hoping he would not, and yet the larger part of him hoped more than anything that he would. Since Jon had spoken to the king in the throne room, this was the closest Barristan had felt to being a true Kingsguard. Under the guise of being the prince's sworn shield, he'd been able to guard his king also, to be close to him, and to speak to him far more than he had in the last few years. That they were so close to making their move, and he almost able to be away from this place, and by Jon's side each day since he'd felt excited when he awoke. Mother said someone attacked Lady Margaery. Tommen said as they walked. They did. But she's unharmed, my prince. Will Sir Jon still compete? She's his friend? Tommen asked. I do not know, my prince. We'll soon find out. He said, glad the prince left it at that. Watching all the knights, squires, and stable lads scurry around to ready themselves for the day's events made him glad he was not competing until the morrow. The king had given him leave to have his own tilts when Jon was not competing so that Tommen could do his duty. Whether it was the prince's or his own idea, Barristan couldn't be certain, but he was glad of it. "There's Sir Loras," Tommen said, and Barristan chuckled at the young boy, noticing he gave the title only to those he liked. "Let's go speak to him and see if Sir Jon is nearby." They walked over and found Loras being helped by Jon's cousin Cregan and Lady Brienne, though there was no sign of Jon or Jaime anywhere. Once they reached them, it was Tommen who asked, and Barristan found himself relieved, both with the first question from the prince's lips and the answer to the second.
"Sir Loras."
"My best wishes to Lady Margaery," Tommen said, and Barristan watched as the smile appeared on Loras's face. "I thank you, my prince. I'll relay them to my sister when I speak to her." "Is Sir Jon to compete, Sir Loras?" Tommen asked nervously. "He is my prince. He and Sir Ghost should be along in a little while. Why don't you go see to Sir Winter?" Loras said, and Barristan had to hurry after the prince as he almost ran to the stables. They found Winter and Honor still in their stalls, and Barristan picked up some apples for both of them, handing them off to the prince to feed them both. He then helped the prince find the brush and got the stool ready for him to brush the horse's coat, the mare standing still as he did so. It was when they went to get the saddle that he heard Jaime and Jon walk in, and the smile on the prince's face was beaming when he saw his knight. "A dutiful squire indeed, even more so than I was at your age. I thank you, my prince, for your diligence," Jon said, smiling at the prince and giving Barristan a nod. "It is my duty to help you prepare Sir Jon. Shall I go check the lists?" Tommen asked, and Barristan watched as Jon looked to Jaime and then him, motioning with his head that they'd talk later. "Why don't we both go and check my prince? I'm sure Sir Barristan can spare you for a moment, and Sir Walder and Sir Daemon will ensure we're both well guarded." Jon said the last part whispered to Tommen, though loud enough that he could hear. "Can I, Sir Barristan?" Tommen asked eagerly. "Go, but straight back here, my prince,"
he said, and watched as Jon and the prince walked from the stables,
both of them laughing and Jon mussing the prince's hair. They weren't gone long when he moved to Jaime, eager to find out about the king's mood and if there was a larger threat against him. "He seems happier than I'd have thought," he said. Affront Barristan, a mummery. Had Lady Margaery herself not basically ordered him to leave, then he'd still be at her bedside. Jaime said, "The lady is well?" "Shaken, but all things considered she is. Well, the attack, it makes no sense. Barristan, not it, nor the attacker," Jaime said, moving closer to him. "You think Dorne involved?" he asked. "To what end?" "Oberyn and Doran have accepted Jon, and Tyrion and Arianne are involved in seeking to marry. No, it makes no sense for them to act against us," Jaime said, and Barristan found himself agreeing. "Then who?" he asked. "I don't know. Jon will find out, though. Barristan, and may the gods help the people responsible." He helped Jaime saddle both horses, and when Jon and Tommen came back, it was a disappointed prince he saw, as the list hadn't been released yet. Though that disappointment soon faded when, after Jon led Winter from the stables, he then helped the prince onto the horse's back. They rode down to the practice area with Barristan walking with Jaime behind them. Looking around, he was glad to see no other member of the royal family in sight when they reached the open grounds, Jon deciding to ride fast down the straight with the prince still in the saddle when they got there. While Barristan knew it was to help bring Tommen even more close to them, he could also see that while Tommen laughed loudly, Jon too seemed happy in the ride. Soon enough it was time to head to the tilt yards themselves, and they were joined by Robb Stark, who was acting as lance-bearer for his brother, while Tommen worked as a squire. It seemed Lady Brienne was acting for Jaime and Cregan for Loras, and Barristan watched as the day's competitors lined up. The king and queen had already arrived, and the joust was soon to be declared open. On behalf of their graces King Robert and Queen Cersei, my lords and ladies, good men and women of King's Landing and the realm, I hereby welcome you to the jousts of the Tourney of King's Landing 297 AC. King's Landing. 297 AC, Jerian. He sat with Ashara and Joy, Jenna, and Kevin sitting behind him with their children, and Daisy and Joanna to his left. All of them apart from Joy having little to no interest in the day's events. Even though John, Loras, and Jamie would all be competing, Jerian had felt no interest in seeing a joust, the events of the past day making it seem a chore rather than a pleasure to attend. They'd been stunned when they heard and had given John and the Tyrells the day, even despite Joy's protestations. Only going to the Tyrell manse that morning to both show their support, and so Joy could see that Margaery truly was unharmed. The night before, they'd sat around the table, Jamie and Daisy and he and Ashara, even Kevin and Jenna joining them as they discussed it. None of them able to understand why someone would attack Margaery so publicly, and even less sure of what the reason for the attack would be. When they had arrived at the Tyrell manse, Joy had almost dragged him to Margaery's room, and he'd stood watching as his daughter had hugged first Margaery and then John. She then looked over every inch of the girl, making sure that she was unhurt, and only once she was sure had not been, had she relaxed. He'd been surprised to see Margaery seem so unperturbed by the attack, though she was clearly holding some of it inside. "I don't think she or Olenna are coming," Ashara whispered as the riders lined up to be introduced. "No, it seems not. Lord Mace and Lady Allery have come, as has her brother," he said, nodding to where the Lord of Highgarden sat. "Aye, how is she?" she whispered as Joy stared out at the riders, her eyes going to John and smiling when she saw him. "Relieved," he said, and she nodded. Like with most jousts, the first few were boring and the competition only raised any interest in them when those they cared about took part. That Loras and John were both competing so soon after the attack, adding in more worry than their opponents would give them. So when Loras was the first of them to ride out, Garion and Joy moved to the edge of their seats, and up in the stands, he felt the Tyrells were doing likewise. Not that any of their concern was needed as Loras unhorsed his opponent on the second tilt, Jamie. When he rode, managing to do it in the single tilt, and the day soon went into a routine, John they'd learned was not riding until after lunch. They ate nearby, having decided not to leave the field like some others, Jenna and Ashara making a picnic of it. Loras and Cregan and Jamie and Brienne soon joined them, though John and Rob did not, and Jerian found himself worrying a little about John's focus in the upcoming joust. "John not coming, Papa?" Joy said. And it was Jamie who answered, "He's eating with Winter, Joy, making sure he's ready for the tilt," Jamie said, and Jerian was happy that Joy seemed to accept this. The meal was far more fun than he had thought it would be, the boys and girls all laughing together, Tion and Willem speaking of the duels on the morrow, and Joy annoying them both by picking Martin as the winner. Even Loras seemed to be far more relaxed than he had been earlier that morning. After eating, they made their way back, and soon it came time for John to tilt, Joy looking to him when Winter came into view. "Did you place my wager, Papa?" Joy asked, and he chuckled. "I did, though I got bad odds," he said. And Joy just smirked. The coin wasn't the prize for his daughter, it was backing John that she cared about it. He looked to see the prince standing with Rob, both of them holding the lance as they gave it to John, and then the ride began, and the hit was as perfect as he'd ever seen. The rider flew from his horse, and John waited until he rose before he turned and rode back. Be it eagerness to be done with the day, or whether John carried extra anger in him. Garion couldn't be sure. What he knew was that he wasn't the only one relieved the day was done. King's Landing. 297 AC. J. Harry's Targaryen. While he was glad she'd slept, Jay also wished she'd wake and tell him that she was feeling well, that she wasn't thinking of the attack and what she'd seen. Each movement she made on the bed making him think she was seeing that man's face, and each sharp breath she took making him wish to reach out to her. He and Olenna had eaten in the room with her, only leaving to speak to Richard or to use the privy. When Sansa and Robb had arrived, he'd hugged his sister tight, and then his brother also, telling them both that Margaery was unharmed and allowing his sister time with her friend. Robb told him a little of the run-in they'd had with Lady Catelyn, though. He gave him no details, and Jay could sense his brother's upset. Sansa's was harder to find, though that may have been because of worry for Margaery. Reluctantly, Sansa left to eat, and then came back to say her goodnights. Robb heading back to the manse with a letter to Jaime, and Jon and Olenna settled in for the night. Mace and Allery, Willis and Loras all came by, and though they weren't fearful, their concern was clear to see. His own more in tune with Olenna's, who seemed comforted by his presence. "Jon," he heard Margaery say, and looked to see her sitting up, Olenna having drifted off just like he had done. "Marge, I'm here. "Shiz," he said, moving to the bed, feeling her wrap her arms around him. "Oh, Jon," she said softly as he held her. "It's over, Marge. He's gone and can't harm you." He said, and felt her nod against his shoulder, moving back a little. He looked into her eyes and kissed her, feeling her kiss him even harder. Ahem. They heard the cough, and he turned to see Olenna awake and looking at them. "Grandmother," Margaery said, and he moved from her so she could be embraced by Olenna. After a few moments of silence that was broken by Margaery's stomach rumbling, Jay got up and went to grab her some food, returning as quickly as he could with some cold meats and fruit, which both he and Olenna were happy to see Margaery ate most of. After she drank some juice and made herself comfortable on the bed, she asked what they knew, and so he told her most of what happened, leaving out the more gruesome of details. "Why me?" she asked. "I don't know, Marge. I will find out, though. I'll find out everything," he said, and she looked at him curiously. "Oh, the glass candles. I can use them more. I saw the past, Harrenhal and my parents. I saw the truth of the rebellion," he said, and both Margaery and Olenna looked at him with intrigue. "The truth?" Olenna asked. Robert knew. Not only did my mother tell him she had no wish to marry him, she sent a letter to him telling him of her and my father's marriage. He knew. At the Trident he knew, and fought not for my mother as he claimed, but to kill my father because of jealousy and envy. He wished the crown, and he used my mother to get it, he said, and Margaery reached out to touch his hand. "I'm so sorry, Jon," his wife said, and he smiled at her and looked her in the eyes. "After the day you had, it's me who's supposed to be comforting you," he said with a chuckle, and was happy to see her smile. Olenna reluctantly went to her bed after he once again gave her his oath that he'd behave honorably, and once she had gone, he lay down beside his wife and held her in his arms. Both of them soon falling asleep, and Jay waking early the next morning. It was then they almost argued once more. Margaery telling him he had to compete, and Jay trying to get her to understand he didn't wish to. "It's not about your wish, Jon. It's how it'll look. Not to mention Prince Tommen and your plans. You must compete," she said as he looked at her and shook his head. "I should be by your side protecting you. That's the only thing I should do." "You can't protect me always, Jon, despite wanting to. Besides, you came when I needed you. You saved me. I'll not go today, but you must." "Quode," she said. "Marge." "No, Jon, I insist," she said. And were he not so annoyed, he'd have laughed at the crease in her brow when she spoke. "Ghost stays with you," he said, leaving no room for argument, and she nodded. They broke their fast with the rest of her family, and he could see they were relieved to see her seeming so relaxed and unbothered by the previous day. Once they were done, Jay sent out for his chest and was glad when Jaime brought it with him. He carried it into the room and reached inside to take out the green and black candles, leaving the other one inside. "Jay," Olenna asked, "since I must compete and you don't wish to attend, perhaps you don't need to miss out," he said, and Margaery looked to him and then grimaced when he cut his palm. Holding the green one in his hands, Jay looked to the black one and then pictured the tiltyard and watched as it came into view. "Olenna," looking on while Margaery smiled, and he then explained what they'd see. "You can watch with this. It'll work until I use the green one again," he said, and Olenna smirked. "You can use them that easily?" she asked. "To see the present eye. The past is a different matter, and I've not been able to see the future yet." "The future?" Olenna asked curiously. "I've seen some. Margaery has too, but I've not been able to will it yet. I can't control it," he said. And Olenna looked to Margaery. As he was getting ready to leave, she came to him with a small box in her hand, and he shook his head, Margaery looking at him confusedly. "Is that my present?" he asked, and she nodded. "Perhaps it's for the best if I collect it later." "You don't wish it now?" she asked, her voice a little hurt. "More than anything in the world, my love, but later would be for the best. That way I can fully thank you," he said, and moved in to kiss her softly, the kiss being all too brief. "Very well, I can accept that," she said with a smirk, before wishing him luck for the day ahead. He found spending time with the prince to be far more enjoyable than he had hoped, Tommen proving himself an excellent squire, and he hoped not only to keep him on, but once the truth outed that the lad would accept it and stay with him regardless. The tilt itself wasn't a problem, and if anything it was more of an inconvenience, the truth being that he'd much prefer to be elsewhere. After stabling Winter and reaching out to Ghost to find him laying on Margaery's floor, Jay walked with Sir Barristan and Prince Tommen and his own guards back to the Red Keep. He did his best to keep the prince amused, laughing and japing, telling him little stories, and by the time they reached it, he knew he'd made an even bigger friend of the boy. It was as he was walking back he saw her, and he knew that he'd not be able to dodge out of her way, Lady Catelyn seeming to focus directly on him as she walked with her guards. "Lady Catelyn," he said with a nod as he tried to pass her. "You think you have it all in hand, don't you? Not content with surrounding yourself with your betters, you seem to think that no one can see your true nature," Lady Catelyn said, and for the briefest moment he was about to walk away, and then he stopped and looked her in the eye. "And pray tell me, Lady Catelyn, what my true nature is. You are a bastard born of lust and deceit, and lust and deceit is all you know. You wish what isn't yours, and while you may have hoodwinked all these others, I'm on to you, bastard," she said, looking at him. "Are you, indeed? What a clever woman you must be. Lady Catelyn, why in all your focus on me you've proved it time and time again after all," he said with a smirk. "What do you mean by that?" she asked angrily. "Why is it, if I'm who you think me to be, that you and your cleverness, would you not have been able to stop me, to see me brought low, to remind me of my station? Yet as I've risen, it's you who've fallen, you who've been set aside and whose position is not what it once was," he said, and made to move on. "How dare you?" she said, moving to him and then stopping when Arthur and Walder moved to step forward. "I dare because I can, my lady, because it's my nature after all," he said with a chuckle, and then ducked as the slap came. "Haven't seen me in the yard? Do you really think you'll be the one I let get a hit on me? Mark my words, my lady, and mark them well. The days when I cowered to a fish are long gone," he said. "Bastard," she shouted, and he looked at her and smirked before she shouted again. "You'll not get Winterfell. I'll see you dead first." "You really lack imagination, my lady. Why would I wish for Winterfell? I have no quarrels with my brothers or sisters. They were not the ones who saw me as less than them. No, my lady, that was you. And so why would I seek to punish them?" he said, looking to her and enjoying the gulp she gave. "What? What do you mean? Your family is in a position it doesn't deserve, my lady. Your father broke an oath that had stood for over 200 years. Family, duty, and honor you claim, and yet your house cares not for any of them, not truly. Words in the wind, my lady, words in the wind. That's what House Tully truly stands for. And just like words in the wind, your house too will soon be forgotten." Jay said as he walked away, leaving her fuming behind him. He began to whistle. Leaving him had been hard, especially with where he was going, and she felt some fear for him because of it. But she had no choice. She could feel the call, as could Lygaron, and so they both took flight and headed south. She knew these lands from flying over them with Jay, and though they kept mainly to the coast so they could feed, it felt good to be flying over them once again. The whale they found near the arbor had fed them both, and as they flew over Dorne, she was glad of it. While there was food to be had in the deserts, it was not plentiful, and as much as Lygaron wished to fly where it was, Rainix couldn't risk it. Starfall and Sandstone, Hellholt, Vaith, Lemonswood, and finally, Sunspear. Rainix had learned the keeps in Dorne when she was still a girl, when she was Rhaenys only and not as she was now. Though the line between what she had once been and what she now was could be hard to determine at times. Even for herself, it became a question day by day. Was she a girl, a dragon, or both? Sometimes she felt more one than the other, and some days she wasn't quite sure. What she knew was that she was a sister, and Jay was her little brother, just as Lygaron was, though she felt him differently than she did her other little brother. "We're going the wrong way," Lygaron said when they passed by Sunspear and out onto the water. "This is where we've to go," she said, and could feel his frustration. Lygaron having felt the presence of his rider below them. They found seals near the stepstones and ate their fill before landing and taking their rest on an empty island, the high mountain opening into a valley below. She slept that night and waited for Jay to come, and was thankful when he did, more so that it was her he came to and not her as the dragon. They found themselves strolling through Summer Hall, and as she looked around, she felt it more keenly than ever. We almost lost Father here. Had he fallen then, we'd never have been born, she said sadly. We were meant to be Ray. I was shown that I was always to be born, and we're bonded, are we not? Jay said, making her smile. What? We are, she said, as they sat down and looked up at the stars. The harp played in the background, a haunting melody, and she for the briefest moment saw him sitting there, though when Jay turned, he was gone. That he heard it was enough for her, though, and that they'd shared it together. Sometimes it would be only her, and she liked these times far better. You heard? She asked, and he nodded. I heard. Father used to come here alone and play under these very stars,
Jay said.
And Rainey snuggled close to him and felt her brother's arm wrap around her shoulder. When she woke, it was to her other little brother, and he was being his usual annoying self. Lygaron was hungry once more and eager to both feed and to be on his way, while Rainix wished to wake up first and shake the previous night from her thoughts. Taking to the sky, she looked down to see the ships and their crews, pirates, and worse, roam Theseus' shores, and for a moment she felt like giving them the fire, but they were not. Why they were here, and so they flew on. They ate more seals, and she laughed as Lygaron complained of their taste, and then they headed south as she felt the call grow stronger. They flew high over Lys, and she wondered what they looked like to those below, hearing Lygaron snort when she pictured them being seen as nothing more than birds. When they saw the 14 flames, she felt it deep in her heart. Home. This was home. We must rest there, Rainix said, and Lygaron agreed, the caves high away from the smoking sea beneath them. Tomorrow, he asked eagerly. Tomorrow, she said as they landed and took their sleep. Jay didn't come that night, and so Rainey's walked alone, down dark corridors and with no noise being made. She looked through doorway after doorway and found herself alone and scared. She'd been here before when she was young, and she hated it still. Here at night most of all. The Red Keep was different when darkness fell, and as a girl, she'd far preferred to be on Dragonstone. As she moved, she heard him in the distance, and she was glad she woke up when she did. Being alone was bad enough. Being alone with him was far worse, and she could never wish her grandfather away like she could the other ghosts of her past. Food was scarcer here than even the desert, and she knew they couldn't trust the sea or what they may find, so onward they flew until the city came into view. "Is that it?" Lageron asked. "It is Valyria," she said as they flew between the towers like the dragons of old. King's Landing, 297 AC, J. Harry's Targaryen. Seeing Margaery sitting in the crowd was something that he was both relieved and very proud of. That she'd been able to even stand to be out a day after the attack was something which showed, not that he hadn't already known, just how strong-willed she was. Jay smiled up at her and was glad to see that she nodded and smiled back, and were it not for Joy beside him, then he'd have probably spent the rest of the morning just looking to his wife. "Willem is up, John," Joy said, and he turned to look as Willem faced the squire from House Royce. "What do you think, Joy? Will Willem win?" he asked, and tried not to smirk when she placed her hand on her chin and looked carefully at the two boys. She said, and he nodded and watched as the fight began. "Win!" he did, though it was far closer than it should have been, Willem taking the match 5-4 when he really shouldn't have given up more than 2 points. Tion had been beaten, and Jay had seen the similarities in how both boys fought, making a note to speak to them afterward and point them in the right direction. Something he didn't need to do with Martin and Walder. Both boys were far more diligent, and Martin was far ahead of the rest of the completion, other than perhaps Ned Dane. As the spars went on, it became clear to John that it would be one or the other who'd take the day, and he looked forward to seeing them matched, though it was Walder who ended up facing Ned in the last match before the melee. John looked to see that Arthur, Cregan, and Ashara were all looking on eagerly, as was Jenna, and he felt torn. Turning to Joy once again, he asked her pick. "Joy?" he asked, and she laughed as she shook her head. "No, you picked this time," she said, and Jay put on his best frowning face, which only made her laugh more. "Ned," he said, and she nodded as both boys began to fight. Ned took the first point with a quick thrust which caught Walder napping, and then the second with a counter, Walder taking the third with a riposte after a series of parries. Ned's move to take the fourth drew some claps from the crowd, and the fifth and sixth were matching blows caught by both boys, with Ned taking the match 5-2 with a lucky move when Walder overextended himself. With Martin then taking his fight 5-1, the melee soon took place, and Jay looked out to the field. He saw Loras and Brienne do the same, while Rob was distracted by something Winifred was saying. Jay, finding himself looking up to Margaery as his brother and his betrothed sat and laughed together, and he closed his eyes to change the image to one of him and his wife. "Martin will win," Joy said, and Jay turned to look as Martin was facing off against the large lad from House Buckler. Jay watched on as Martin easily dodged the heavy blows of the larger lad, waiting and biding his time to counter with blows of his own once the others had been missed. Soon the boy was yielding, and Martin moved on to the next opponent, and Jay watched as he spun in and out with his thrusts. To the other side, Ned was more steady and focused, and his fundamentals were what was getting him true, while Martin fought as close to Jay as he could imitate. Even had he not noticed then, Joy's words would have made that clear. "He fights like you," Joy said, and Jay nodded as Martin beat the other boy, and Ned made his lad yield. He looked up at Kevin, who was staring out at his son, a proud smile on his face as Martin beat the last boy and turned to face Ned. Even Jay sitting at the edge of his seat to watch this fight, as for once he was genuinely at a loss to pick a winner, though thankfully this time it was Joy's turn to pick, and not his. "Joy?" he asked. "Martin," she replied, not even bothering to turn her eyes from the field. The first 2 points went to Ned, and Jay was surprised as much as the crowd was, more so when he took the next one as well. He felt Joy grab his hand, and her fingers squeezed tight, and then he watched as Martin moved far too fast for Ned, the blows coming in quick succession, and to spin something he recognized all too well. "I told you he moves like you," Joy said as the fifth point landed, and Jay looked out to see both boys smiling at each other and shaking each other's hand. Standing up, he clapped loudly, as did all those nearest to him, and they quietened down as the herald made the announcement. "Your graces, my lords and ladies, the winner of the squire's melee, Martin Lannister." I have to go get ready, he said, and Joy leaned forward to kiss his cheek for good luck, Jay tickling her and making her laugh before he headed to the back. He had barely made it past the seats when Barristan and Tommen came his way, the prince obviously waiting for him, and Jay once again had to give the boy credit. Instead of sitting in the seats with him or with his family to watch the duels, Tommen had with Barristan stayed in the back to prepare things, though he had watched the duels from there. Did you see Sir John? That last one especially. Martin won, Tommen said excitedly. He did, my prince. One day, if you train, that could be you. Jay said, and Tommen looked at him to see if he was making fun of him, and once he saw he was not, he looked to Barristan, who nodded. Will you train me, Sir John? Tommen asked. I would be honored to, my prince, Jay said, and the smile he got in return was only made bigger when he reached out and mussed the prince's hair, Tommen laughing as they walked to the tent. They met Martin along the way, Jay glad to see him speaking to Ned as well as Tion, Walder, and Willem. After congratulating them both and whispering how proud he was of Martin in the boy's ear, Jay, Tommen, and Barristan walked the final few yards to their tent. Inside, Loras was already getting ready, and Cregan and Brienne were helping him into his armor. Jay took a seat and Barristan helped Tommen to bring over his own, the bold already decked out in all but his helm and ready for his own ride. As Jay showed Tommen which way the armor was put on, Barristan doing most of the heavy lifting for the prince, they all talked jovially of the day's jousting, Barristan regaling them with tales of his own exploits, and Jay finding himself as enraptured as any. You rode against Prince Duncan, Sir Barristan. Did you know the prince? Jay asked far more eagerly than he perhaps would have been had he not met Maya Rivers. I did, Sir John, the Prince of Dragonflies, both he and his lady wife, Barristan said, and whether it was the look Jay got in his eyes or something else, the knight soon changed the subject. After he was ready, he, Loras, Sir Barristan, and the prince all walked to find out the list for the day and see who they were drawn against. Jay, allowing the prince to run the final few feet alone so he could bring him the news. Sir Barristan was drawn against Sir Aaron Santigar and Jay against Sir Lynn Corbray, while Loras got the luckiest draw of all. Looks like I'm going fishing, Loras said with a chuckle. Fishing? Tommen asked as he looked to Jay. What's the sigil of House Tully, my prince? Jay asked. A silver trout, the prince said, and Jay nodded and Tommen grinned when he got the meaning. When they reached their tent, it was Sir Barristan who bid his farewells first, the knight riding before they were. Tommen wished the knight well, but stayed with Jay and the two guards who now stood outside that had obviously been sent to cover Sir Barristan's absence, though they were poor substitutes, Jay felt. When Robb arrived, Brienne left to act as Jaime's squire for the day, Robb informing them that Jaime had drawn Sir Ander Royce in his first tilt. Well, my prince, shall we go and watch the bold take his victory? Jay asked. And Tommen nodded. It turned out to be an easy enough one for Sir Barristan, as Sir Aaron fell in two, and after watching the next two tilts, they headed to the stables. Jay stood with Winter for a few moments before he saddled her, Tommen speaking to Robb while Jay leaned against his mare's head. He could feel her eagerness to ride and ride fast, and though he relaxed her somewhat, he allowed her to keep that eagerness for the day ahead. After being helped up onto the horse, Jay was led out by Prince Tommen with Robb walking beside him and Sir Barristan joining them along the way. He was ready for the day ahead and whatever it would bring, and as they led him onto the field, he looked up and saw her in the crowd, his wife watching as he touched the favor on his hip. King's Landing, 297 AC, Jaime. Watching Martin win the squire's melee was almost like stepping back in time. There was so much of Jon's movements and influence in how his nephew fought that it was like seeing a ghost at times. Though nowhere near as fast or skilled as Jon was, his nephew was a fine swordsman, and just like Jon had been at that age, Jaime doubted there was a finer one in his age group in the land. Seeing how proud Kevin was of his son was something he relished, and he almost wished to have more time to talk to him about it. The jousts, though, were starting, and he needed to get ready, and so after kissing Daisy and Joanna, he made his way to the tent and got ready. It felt strange having Brienne be the one to help him into his armor. Years of having it be Loras and Jon seeming now to be over, and while he was proud they'd grown up, he felt he missed them a little too. "You've been drawn against Sir Andar Royce, my lord," Brienne said when his last piece of armor had been tied. "Jon, Loras?" he asked. Jon drew Sir Lyn Corbray, and Loras drew Lord Edmure Tully, Brienne said, and Jaime couldn't help but chuckle. The fish would be flopping soon enough, he felt. They missed Barristan's tilt against Sir Aaron, though Jaime had no fear that the bold would win, and they arrived just before Jon rode against Sir Lyn. Jaime wondered if Jon felt how Oberyn did about the man being a lackey of Littlefinger's, and looked on a little worried as the two horses rode towards each other. The first tilt ended in a draw, as did the second, and Jaime felt that Jon seemed rusty to him, as if he'd not practiced enough. That fear soon went away, though, as on the third tilt Jon found his rhythm, and Sir Lyn did well to stay in his saddle. Something he didn't manage in the fourth, as Jon caught him almost flush, and the knight flew from his horse. He landed safely enough, and for a moment Jaime thought he may seek to continue it on foot, but he walked away with a nod to Jon. "Lord Tully." "My lord," Brienne whispered, as Robb and Tommen led Winter from the field. Jaime looked to Jon, who was speaking to the prince, and then, as Edmure passed him by, Robb nodded to his uncle and Jon ignored him as he continued to talk to the prince, much to Edmure's annoyance. Jon only looked up when Loras rode towards him with Cregan by his side, and then he jumped from Winter and walked over and said something to Loras. He was standing beside him a moment later with Tommen and Sir Barristan by his side, and Jaime looked to see if there was any anger or worry in his features, finding none. Waiting until Sir Barristan drew Tommen's attention, he leaned in to ask Jon what he'd said to Loras. "What did you tell him?" Jaime asked. "To win, my lord. Just win, nothing else," Jon said, and Jaime nodded. Win Loras did, and both Jon and he found themselves laughing as he did so, at that and the show Loras put on. While Jaime's armor was gilded gold and Jon's a darkish silver, Loras's was a bright polished silver wrought with jeweled flowers. His cape was full of woven roses, and was he a knight already? Then Jaime could imagine the epithet he'd be given. It took him one tilt to unhorse Lord Edmure, and he did it so easily and so contemptuously that even Tommen was chuckling. Then, after he'd won, Jaime and Jon watched as he pulled a white rose from somewhere on Bluebell and rode to the crowd, stopping in front of Margaery to present it to her. As he rode back towards them, Jaime saw Jon shaking his head and laughing before Loras gave them an over-theatrical bow. "Show off," Jon said, still laughing. "Some of us must, Sir Jon. I'll make myself a name here today." Loras said, and Jaime found a smile on his face as he made his way to honor. He was glad to see they'd all stayed to watch his ride, Jon wishing him well as he headed out, and he was soon taking the lance from Brienne. Sir Andar had put on some muscle since he last saw him, and it took him 4 tilts until he took the day, Jaime waiting until the man was up on his feet before he rode back. Once he did and headed back to his own tent, he drained a mug of water while Brienne rushed off to find out the next draw. Jon drew Lord Jason Mallister, and Loras got Lord Beric Dondarrion. Sir Barristan drew Lord Bryce Caron, and you got his brother, Sir Roland Storm, Brienne said, and Jaime nodded. Sir Roland was a poorer jouster than he was a melee knight, though given his size he'd still be difficult. The waiting was always the worst part of the jousts, Jaime felt. The rides themselves were full of excitement and energy, but waiting in the tent until it was your turn was dull. Time seemed to stretch on and never end, and you were alone with your thoughts, even were you in company. Some sought to relieve the boredom with drink or food, though he never liked to ride on a full stomach, while others slept. Jaime, though, just sat and waited, and he could tell it was beginning to annoy Brienne that he was so quiet. "I find silence relaxes me, Brienne. Allows me to think of the ride ahead, and that's why I hold my tongue, not the company I'm with," he said, and saw the girl relax some. "Forgive me, my lord. I'm more used to being with the others, and they're anything but," she said, and he laughed at that. "John likes to entertain, to keep the mood light in Loras. Well, you saw what Loras is like as he rode out there," he said, as she smiled as she nodded. "A show-off," she said. "Aye, very much so. When he first came to the Rock, he did so in spars too. I and John took years trying to get him to stop before he eventually did, in a joust. It's a different matter, and you see how he only shows off before and after?" "Never during," Brienne said, and Jaime nodded. That lesson at least had taken. "Come, let's go watch the others. The show-off is up first, is he not?" he said to last from Brienne. Loras was up first, and Jaime watched as Lord Beric took him to 4 before Loras took the day. The White Rose coming out once again, and this time going to Sansa, as Loras then rode towards them. Barristan was next, and he rode out the winner in 2, easily unhorsing Lord Bryce, and Jaime wondered if it would come down to the 2 of them again today. His own ride was before John's, and so he readied himself and then rode out, looking down the field to see the giant, imposing figure of Sir Roland Storm. The first tilt was almost a loss for him, Sir Roland's lance striking hard and true, and Jaime only barely managing to keep his saddle. The second he rode out, though he caught the knight well, it was to no effect, his strike being brushed aside as if it was nothing. By the time he took the day with the 5th ride, he knew he'd be bruised on the morrow. The lances that had caught him had been hit with so much power that he'd felt each strike. Once in the back, he climbed down gingerly from honor and waited to see John ride against Lord Jason. Like his own, John took 5 tilts to unhorse his rival, though unlike his John never took a blow in return. As he rode back toward them, the skies opened, and Jaime, feeling stiffness in his shoulder, was glad the day was done. "Come, Brienne. It seems as if we'll be finishing on the morrow," he said as they made their way to cover. King's Landing, 297 AC. Olenna. She was glad the day was over early and that it gave her time to relax somewhat before the feast, though the note she had been handed ended all thoughts of that. That the meeting was to be at their manse she was happy about, that it was to be now, not so much. Olenna looked to Margaery, who was speaking to Sansa, and was glad her granddaughter seemed to be somewhat better. That she'd almost lost her to one man's greed for more than he deserved was something that made her furious. That she didn't know what to do with that information, though, was troubling. The more she thought of it, the more certain she was that she was right. Doran had sought to see Margaery dead, and for that, she'd see him in the ground. It was what came with it that caused her to pause, how John would react to knowing it was Doran, and how she could bring that up to him. "Grandmother, will there still be a feast tonight?" Margaery asked. "I'm sure there will. You know how much the king likes feasts," she said with a snort. "Must we attend?" Margaery asked, and Olenna shook thoughts of Doran from her mind as she looked to her granddaughter's worried face. "You and I have no need to if you wish, your mother and father, and Sansa can go if they would like, but we can stay in and spend the night together if that's what you'd prefer." She said softly, and saw Margaery nod. When they reached the manse, she asked Willis to join her along with Allery, needing Mace to be elsewhere when Randall Tarley came to visit. Walking to her solar, she again found herself thinking on Doran and trying to think what to do about the prince, a part of her wishing to hire a faceless man to see him dead, though she knew she would not. As much as she wanted him to pay for what he almost did, Olenna knew it needed to be John who decided his fate. Should she act alone on this, it could create problems down the line, and so as she walked, her mind raced while she tried to come up with a solution. Reaching her solar, she realized the solution was right there in front of her face when Allery and Willis took a seat. Just like with Mace, she wasn't in need of acting alone. There were others she could speak to before they brought it to John. Olenna, smiling as she resolved to arrange a tea with Jenna and the rest of the women who were here. "Read," she said to Willis as he handed him the note, her grandson doing so before he handed it to his mother. "He's coming now?" Willis asked. "Him, Richard, John, and Jaime." Olenna said. Father? Willis asked, and she smiled that he'd seen the issue so quickly. Must be otherwise engaged. I'll accept his annoyance when he finds he's missed Tarly, but the time isn't right for Mace to know yet.
She said, and Allery looked to her.
When will it be? Allery asked. As soon as we leave here, you have my word on that, Allery. As soon as we leave, I'll tell him, she said. And Allery nodded. I'll take him with me. I'm meeting Lord Wyman to discuss some trade, and I'll ask Father to join us. He'll enjoy eating with Lord Wyman if nothing else. Willis said. Very well. See to it. I wish to speak to your mother alone. She said, and Willis looked to her before standing up and walking from the room. She waited until he'd gone, and then poured them both a glass of wine. Allery looking at her before she motioned to the glass. I wish us to have a tea, Allery, like the one we had in Highgarden. I've something of great import to discuss, and I find myself in need of counsel. She said, and her good daughter looked to her with surprise. You're in need of counsel? What's going on, Olenna? I believe Doran Martell is behind the attack on Margaery, she said. And Allery gasped before she swallowed the wine down. By the time she'd left, Allery had agreed with her assessment and the need for counsel her good daughter had taken to Jon a long time ago, and knowing he and Margaery were destined to be together, even more so. So while there was worry for Margaery's safety, which Olenna soon relieved, there was also concern on how Jon would take the news, and Olenna found herself glad she'd confided in her. She was sitting at her desk and didn't know how long she'd been there when Left walked in to tell her that Lord Tarly had arrived, the prickly lord soon sitting down and refusing her offer of a drink. Sir Richard arrived a few moments later, and when Randall saw him it was as if he'd seen a ghost, though before they could speak more than a greeting, Jon and Jaime arrived along with Sir Arthur. Lord Tarly, Lady Olenna, Jon said as Jaime took a seat and accepted the wine she offered, as did Sir Richard. Jaehaerys, she said, and Randiel's head almost came off his neck, it spun so fast. Jaehaerys? Randall said, looking from her to Jaime and Richard and finally to Jon. I was named Jaehaerys Targaryen after the Conciliator and my great-grandfather. My father passing over his own father's name for obvious reasons, Jon said, and she tried not to smirk. You have proof of this, other than a song and a smile? Randall asked, his voice as dismissive as it always was. Along with Sir Richard, who you know, I have some papers which prove my birth, along with certain family artifacts, plus a witness to my birth and the true actions of my mother and father during the rebellion. Sir Arthur, if you'll remove your helm, Jon said, and she watched as Randall Tarly almost fell to the floor when he saw Arthur's face. Sir Arthur? Randall said, his shock even more clear now. Lord Tarly. Arthur replied, I was born in the Tower of Joy to my mother Princess Lyanna and my father Prince Rhaegar Targaryen. They were wed in front of the gods of my mother at the Isle of Faces and in the light of the Seven in a sept outside Harrenhal, Jon said, and she could see the wheels turning in Randiel's head, as could Jay as he spoke before the Lord could. My father's marriage to Princess Elia was annulled, my lord, at both their behests. The documents, Lord Tarly, Jaime said, and Randall almost jumped out of his skin, so unaware had he become that Jaime was even in the room. She watched as he read the papers and looked at each of the men in the room, and then her, before looking to Jon once more. Artifacts, he asked, and Jon reached into his pocket to take out the ring and hand it to Randall, who looked at it with a smile on his face. This was Aegon's. Randall said, It was. I also have Dark Sister, my lord, though I cannot wield it publicly just yet. Jon said with a laugh which she was stunned to see Randall return. You intend to retake your throne? Randall asked. My family was conspired against Lord Tarly, betrayed, and the throne my brother should sit stolen from him along with his life. His mother was raped and my sister butchered, and while I've seen that the men who committed those acts have paid for their crimes, the men who benefited from them and who set the events in motion have not. My mother and father tasked me with seeing justice brought to these men, to seeing our rightful place restored, my lord. So I not only intend to take back my throne, I will take back my throne," Jon said, and even Olenna felt herself stir as he spoke. Though it was nothing compared to how Randall reacted, Olenna looked on shocked as the proud lord of Horn Hill stood up and then took a knee, looking to Jon in a way she'd never seen him look at anyone before. There was reverence and something else in his eyes, and she couldn't quite make out what until he spoke. "I served your father, my king, served him and wished nothing more than to see him crowned. There has not been a day since I heard he fell on the trident that I've not regretted my inaction. Despite my liege lord's orders, I should have taken my men and rode to him, had I, if it had been so." "My lord, you are not the only one with regrets, but I ask you to forget them for now. We cannot change the past, but together we can help define the future," Jon said, and she saw Randall nod. "Horn Hill is yours. My king, my sword is yours, and when you call I will come, and nothing or no one will stop me from seeing you placed on the throne. I pledge my life to yours, to the true king, to Jaehaerys Targaryen, the third of his name." Randall said as she watched as Jon reached out and touched the lord's shoulder. "I accept your fealty, my lord, and I vow that you shall always have a place by my hearth and meat and mead at my table, and pledge to ask no service of you that might bring you into dishonor. I swear it by the old gods and the new. Arise, Lord Tarly." They talked then of the allies that Jon had already collected, and while he made no mention of the dragons, when Randall heard that the West, North, Reach, and Dorne were pledged to him, Olenna saw the man smile, and for once she didn't begrudge it. When they left, she felt a sense of relief. Not that she had any doubt that Randall would kneel to Jon, more that it would change his opinion of her and her house. As she went to bed that night, though, she found her thoughts had turned to Dorne and to Doran once more. Jon seemed so sure that he had Doran's support, and Olenna felt hopeful that it had been Doran alone who'd acted against them. As hard as that would be to take for Jon, were Oberyn to also be involved, she felt that would crush him completely. Though given how the Red Viper acted around Jon, she doubted very much he knew of his brother's actions. King's Landing, 297 AC, Sansa. She was glad to see Jon go into Margaery's room. As much as her friend had claimed not to be upset, Sansa could sense that she still was. Even at the jousts earlier that day, there had been times when a sudden noise or a shout from behind her would lead to a jump from Margaery. While she'd helped as best as she was able to, she had known it wasn't her comfort that Margaery sought, and so when Jon knocked at the door, she was glad to leave them alone. For Sansa, it also gave her time to process the other thing which had been on her mind for the past couple of days. She knew her mother had not played a role in Margaery's attack, and that her mind had gone there made her feel somewhat ashamed of herself. Yet she had needed to hear from others about the man that had attacked Margaery just to be sure. Once she did, and once her concern over Margaery's condition had lessened, her mind went to far darker places. Sitting down on her bed, she looked to Fang, who was laying on the floor, and she thought back to the last time she'd seen her mother before coming to King's Landing. Closing her eyes, she tried to think back to what Fang had seen, and she soon remembered not only that, but what the wolf had heard. Jumping from her bed, she began to pace angrily around the room, the questions in her head demanding answers, and she wondered who would give them to her. She had wished the wolves dead, just like Jon. She'd see them dead, just like him. I'll take care of him. I'll see it done right this time. See what done right. Take care of him. How? Sansa thought as she paced. Jon had been attacked in the Riverlands when they traveled, her mother not wishing her to go to Highgarden but to the Riverlands. Why? Why didn't she wish her to go to Highgarden? Surely that would be the best thing for her, wouldn't it? Sansa felt her mind move in 1,000 directions all at once. Her mother disliked the Tyrells. Why? Her mother loved the South and had spoken to her fondly of it for years, the Tyrells included, until when? She had arrived in Highgarden just before Jon was attacked and before they thought he had fallen. Yet she'd not been surprised that he had. Why? Why wasn't she surprised? Jon. Everything revolved around Jon. He was taking Winterfell from Robb. He was a bad influence on her. He was trying to trick them. This was how her mother thought. This was why she wished her not to foster in Highgarden, not because of what was best for her, but because Jon had been the one to arrange it. The Tyrells, Lanesi, seeing Lanesi and hearing her say Jon was friendly with them. Loras, seeing Loras. Was that when it started? I'll take care of him. I'll see it done right this time. She felt her stomach churn and ran to the privy, though there was nothing to empty. And after kneeling for a few moments, she knew she'd not throw up. Instead, she began to cry, and felt Fang come to her, the wolf rubbing up against her, and it was against her soft fur. She began to sob. How long she sat there, for she didn't know, and as she wondered who she could speak to about this, the knock sounded at the door. "Who is it?" she asked as he walked from the privy, shocked at the voice that came back at her. "Sansa, can we talk?" Jon said, and she opened the door and almost jumped into his arms. "Jon, how?" she asked, and as he wiped the tears from her face, he looked to his side, and she saw a ghost looking up at her. She looked to Fang, who was looking at her, and she smiled. The wolf, having felt her distress, had called out to the pack to come to her. Jon walked with her to the bed, and they sat down, her brother never letting go of her hand as he did so, and she tried to compose herself before she asked the question she feared the answer to. "Jon, did my mother try to have you killed?" she asked softly. She looked as he closed his eyes and seemed to steady himself before he answered. It went on for so long she feared he was trying to figure what lie to tell her, what untruth she may accept. "I never wished you to know, Sansa. Not this. You must believe me," he said. And she once again felt herself being held by him, as her tears came even more freely this time. They sat silently, and Sansa could feel his heart beating against her chest, his fingers stroking her hair as she finally stopped her crying. "I'm so sorry, Jon. I'm so sorry," she said, shaking her head. "Sansa, you've nothing to be sorry for. Why? Why are you apologizing? She's my mother, Jon, and she tried to have you killed. She didn't. Nor would she be able to. I'm unharmed, Sansa. She failed, and should she try again, then she'll fail again," he said. And she looked to him. "She, with Robb and I think she will try again, Jon," she said shakily. "Sansa, look at me. She won't succeed. I've nothing to fear from your mother. You believe me?" he asked, and she nodded. "I never want to see her again. Never, gods. Jon, what kind of a woman does that? Why would she? No, she's not my mother. Not now." "Sansa," he said, looking at her. His face creased as he looked on the verge of crying himself. When the snows fall and the white winds blow, the lone wolf dies, but the pack survives. She tried to hurt a member of the pack. Jon, that means she is not pack. She never was, Sansa said, and she felt her brother's lips as they kissed her cheek. "I love you, little sister," Jon said. Jon said, "I love you too, brother." When he got up to leave, it must have been an hour or so later, and she felt herself begin to drift off, Jon nodding to her to take to her bed, and she too tired to argue with him. As he walked out of the door, she looked to see Ghost and Fang, the two wolves lying side by side, and she knew then she was right. Her mother wasn't pack, and from now on Sansa would treat her as such. She woke the next morning and broke her fast with Margaery, her friend asking her if she was well, and Sansa realizing that Jon had gone to her room before he'd left the manse the night before.
"Something,"
Margaery confirmed as they rode to the day's joust, as not only had Jon slept in her room with her, but he'd been there when he had suddenly left to come to Sansa's. After telling her she was, well, they arrived and took their seats, Margaery seeming to be in a far happier mood today. Soon the Lannisters arrived, and then the Manderleys, making Sansa think of Robb. Her brother would need to be told what she had found out, she felt, but perhaps it could wait a day or so before she told him. When she saw her mother and uncle arrive, she turned away from the wave and smile she gave her, having no interest in returning either. "How many jousts are there today?" she asked Margaery, who turned to Willis for the answer. "I believe to reach the final will require 4, so 5 and 10, Willis said, and Sansa made herself comfortable for the rides to come. Jon, Loras, Lord Jaime, and Sir Barristan all won their first rides, and when the draw came out for the next set, she found herself glad that none of them had been drawn against each other. Jon instead to face Lord Renly and Loras to face her granduncle, while Sir Barristan was against Lord Jan Royce and Lord Jaime to face Sir Richard Horp. She felt the eagerness of the crowd when the tilts were announced, Jon against Renly garnering more excitement than any of the others. Loras, Highgarden. Margaery cheered, as did most of the crowd, and she couldn't help but cheer him herself, even if he was going against her granduncle. While Jon against Renly may be the match the crowd was waiting for, Loras had made himself a firm favorite with them. His armor was incredible, and put even Lord Jaime's to shame, and him handing out roses had only endeared him even more. The first to Margaery and the second to her, followed by the third to Joy, meaning that now as Sansa looked around the crowd, she could see almost every girl looking to see who he'd hand one to next, providing he won the match that was, and as they raced towards each other, Sansa felt herself hoping that he would. The first tilt led to nothing, no hits, which dimmed the crowd's enthusiasm somewhat. The second almost unhorsed her granduncle, and the crowd was back again, cheering enthusiastically as the third one began. Sansa watched as the two horses raced towards each other, and she cheered loudly when her granduncle hit the ground. Relieved as she was when he got up, though she found herself keener to know who was getting the next rose. "Ooh," she whispered to Margaery, who shook her head as Loras took the rose from his saddle and rode towards the crowd. Sansa smiled when she looked to Princess Myrcella, the little girl holding the rose to her nose as Loras rode away and Sir Barristan and Lord Jan rode out. King's Landing 297 AC. Sir Barristan. Hearing from Jon about Randyll Tarly had made his day. The Lord was a fine warrior and a more than capable military commander, and that he was on their side was a great boon. Now, though he had his own campaign to worry about, and having broken 3 lances against Lord Jan, he began to think of what it would be like to face the Bronze Lord across a battlefield once more. Barristan knew he'd be a great asset to their cause, and also an impossible one to bring to bear. Instead, just like in the rebellion, the Honorable Lord would be on the wrong side, and he felt regretful that it would the case once more. Allies and friends were rare enough in this fickle world, and soon he'd be facing off against some that were once the former and a few he considered the latter. As he broke his 4th lance, he tried to think of the positives more than the negatives. He'd be fighting for a good king and alongside his true brothers once more, and were it to be his final fight then, at least when they laid him to rest, it would be for doing something true and good. As he took his lance and rode down the field, he let that be the thought in his head and allowed it to fuel his hit, smiling when the Lord of Runestone fell. "The day is yours, Sir Barristan," Jon said as he rose to his feet, Barristan riding close by to make sure he was unhurt. "It seems so, Lord Jon," he said, riding back to make ready to watch his brothers ride. He found Jon and Loras standing there, their horses just behind them, and Jon speaking to Prince Tommen and making the boy laugh. As he dismounted, he saw Sir Richard Horp ride by, and he wished him well, and then did the same to Jaime. Looking once again to Jon and Tommen, he found himself wondering about Myrcella and what he may have planned for her. Getting Tommen away from King's Landing seemed something they may manage. Getting the princess away was something he knew nothing about. "So, Sir Jon, who'll win?" "Will win?" he asked, and saw Tommen look to his knight just as eagerly as he was, though he knew both the answer and what Jon would say. "Lord Jaime will take it, Sir Barristan, which means I had better take my own. Otherwise, Loras will never allow me to live down not making this final 4. Jon said, and Barristan found himself hoping that would be the case, feeling his excitement at the idea. Jon, the first 2 tilts were shared, and surprisingly, Sir Richard took the next 2, Jaime's blows landing ineffectively. The next one, however, did not, and even Barristan cringed at the sound of the impact as Sir Richard fell. The crowd hushed when Jaime dismounted to check on the knight, and it took a few moments for him to rise to his feet, winded but not hurt, thankfully. "Trimber awe, that looked to be much worse," Jon said, and he nodded. "Aye, that it did," he replied. "Sir Jon, care for a wager, or is it only my brother you do those with?" A voice called, and Barristan turned to see Lord Renly riding towards them with his young squire walking behind. "Name your terms, my lord," Jon said with a smirk. "How about 500 gold dragons?" Renly said, staring at Jon as he did so. "What say you, my prince? Should we take Lord Renly's wager? I leave it to you to decide," Jon said, and Barristan couldn't miss the wide-eyed look the prince got as he turned to Lord Renly. "We accept, uncle," Tommen said, and Jon patted his back. "Then I wish you both good fortune, Sir Jon, nephew." He watched as Jon climbed up on Winter and as Tommen led the horse out onto the field, Barristan feeling a sense of anticipation as they both took their lances. "What did I miss?" Jaime said as he walked to them with Lady Brienne by his side. "Lord Renly's wagered 500 gold dragons on beating Jon," Cregan said, and Barristan heard Jaime laugh as he looked to the field. "What is it with stags and wagers?" Jaime said, still laughing as the horses began their run. The third tilt was where he won it, though it took to the fourth for it to happen. But it was the blow that Jon caught him in the shoulder which did for Renly more than the hit which unhorsed him. Jon catching him flush and hard, and Barristan reckoned he'd not move the arm for a day or two once the bruising began to show. The fourth tilt was pride from Renly, and could have ended far worse had Jon not pulled his lance, the blow just taking his seat and not doing far more damage. "Well, I made it," Jon said when he rode back and climbed off his horse. Jaime, himself, Jon, and Loras all looking to each other, and Barristan finding himself smiling at the company he now kept. "Come, let's see which of us faces whom next," he said, and they walked to the draw, this one being done in front of the crowd, unlike the others. Lord Jaime Lannister to face. He heard the crowd hush, and saw both Jon and Loras look on eagerly. Loras Tyrell, Sir Barristan Selmy to face Sir Jon Snow, the herald said, and he was happy to see no disappointment on Jon's face. "I had hoped to face Loras. At least then I'd have had a chance to make the final." Jon japed, and he and Jaime rolled their eyes when the two boys began to push each other, laughing as they did so. "I wish you good fortune, Sir Barristan. I expect you to give your all," Jon said, leaving him in no doubt he meant every word, "as I do you. Sir Jon, Lord Jaime, Loras, I wish you both the best," he said, and Jon bid them both his best wishes too. King's Landing 297 AC. J. Harry's Targaryen. Even with the events of the last few days, he found it easy to concentrate on what was ahead of him. A ride against the bold once more. As he looked to see Jaime and Loras ride out, he nodded to them both and noticed something strange. Brienne was carrying Jaime's sword for some reason, putting it out of his head, for now he looked to the crowd. Daisy held Joanna, and the little girl waved enthusiastically at her father while Daisy rolled her eyes at something Jaime did that he missed. Robert was sitting with Jon Arryn and his wife along with the other two Tullys, and he could see Lady Catelyn's smug smile from here, though it was the conversation going on between Robert and Littlefinger that truly caught his eye. The two men were laughing and japing as if they were the best of friends, and Jay wondered why that was. His attention soon focused on the Tyrells, and he saw Sansa and Willis laughing at something, though the Lord was also watching the field at the same time. Lord Mace and Lady Allery looked on with a mixture of pride and worry when Loras waved and Lady Olenna sat close to Margaery and alternated between looking to her and to Loras. Margaery looked incredible, and he watched as she cheered Loras on, feeling the tiniest bit jealous that she could not do the same so openly with him. "They're getting ready, Sir Jon," Tommen said, and he looked from the crowd to the field and saw them ready to make their first ride. "Then we shall wish them both well, my prince, and hope I'm ready to face one of them in the final," he said, and Tommen nodded and shouted out good luck, bringing a smile to Jay's face. Honor moved a little quicker than Bluebell, and as a result, it was Jaime's lance which hit home a fraction of a second before Loras's did. It took the sting out of Loras's strike, which was a good thing for Jaime, as his friend's was as good a strike as he'd seen during this whole tourney. Both lances broke on the second ride, and on the third, Loras, to Jay's mind, taking both of them just barely. The fourth ride, Loras caught Jaime on the shoulder, and Jay winced when he saw how stiffly Jaime moved after it. He'd seen the bruise there from one of the earlier tilts and could only imagine how much bigger it would be now. It fired Jaime up somewhat, and whether he'd been holding back or whether he felt he didn't have another tilt in him just now, he rode faster on the next tilt, unseating Loras and then stopping Honor to look as Loras got back to his feet, as the crowd cheered his win, though Jay saw him look to Brienne before he nodded and then dismounted. "What's he doing, Sir John?" Tommen asked, confused, and when Jay saw Jaime speak to Loras and Brienne rush to him, he liked the crowd hushed. "Loras Tyrell, kneel," Jaime said, and Jay saw Loras pull off his helm. Jay, like the rest of the crowd, cheered a few moments later, louder and more true than he had cheered for almost anything he could remember. Loras stood up, and he could see the tears in his friend's eyes. Everything he had ever wished to be, he was now, and that it had been Jaime to name him, so only making it that much more special. "He's Sir Loras now," he said to Tommen, and the prince looked incredibly excited, having never expected to see such a thing this day. "Come, we can talk to the new knight later on. My prince, we have our own tilt to ready for." As he and the bold rode out, Jaime and Loras passed them by, and Jay bowed, as did Barristan, to the newly named knight, Loras's tears now replaced by a smile as he nodded back. Riding over to where Robb waited, Jay looked down at the prince and watched as they handed him the lance, turning ready to ride out against the bold and happy he'd made it this far. "Good fortune, Sir John," Tommen shouted after he and Winter cantered to the edge of the field and turned ready to ride against Sir Barristan. Seeing the knight at the other end of the field was as imposing as seeing the bold up close, and as they began to ride, Jay prepared for the impact as best he could. The first lance he managed to easily block with his shield, though he found his own block just as easily. The second, he got a little more purchase, though. It was like hitting a stone wall, and the third was like being hit by one. As he rode the fourth, he began to concentrate on Sir Barristan's movements, even more, looking for any sign to give him an advantage. It wasn't until the sixth that he found it, and the seventh until he was able to try and use it. He rode a little faster and felt Winter really stretch her legs, seeing Barristan ready his lance. He lifted his leg from the stirrup and put all his weight on the other one. When Barristan's blow came, Jay had twisted in the saddle, leaving him nothing to push back against the hit. The lance, finding no resistance, put Barristan off balance, and Jay hit his own good and true and watched as Barristan fell to the ground. Fixing himself back in the saddle, his foot still only in one of the stirrups, he turned to see Barristan rising to his feet and rode toward him. The knight laughing when he got there, and Jay only really then truly realizing that he had won and would be facing Jaime in the final. When he reached the back and dismounted, the prince was looking at him with a stunned and yet happy look, Loras slapping him on the back and Robb cheering him on. Yet Jay could only see Jaime as he walked to his horse and got ready to ride against him for the first time. "You beat the bold, Sir John, you beat the bold," Tommen said, and Jay looked down to see the large smile on his face. "My squire brings me luck, my prince. Come, we've one more yet to face," he said, and Tommen almost skipped beside Winter as they followed Jaime out onto the field. He didn't say anything to Jaime as they rode together. No words were needed, and he knew he didn't have to tell him to give it his all. Instead, they rode in silence and nodded to each other when they stopped to face the crowd. "Your graces, my lords and ladies, the final of the joust between Lord Jaime Lannister, the Warden of the West, and Sir Jon Snow, the White Wolf," the herald said to cheers. That it was the final, and something that, had he been able to choose, would have been his choice, didn't make it any better than it could have been. Jay knowing after the third tilt that though both were trying their best, The ride was far less exciting than it should have been. Why that was he couldn't tell. It wasn't as if they weren't both trying, but perhaps they couldn't live up to the expectation, and he could sense the crowd growing restless. All had changed on the 4th as both of them struck home, and were it not for their will or determination. Then he felt either of them would have been unhorsed. In the 5th, they were, not one of them, but both of them, as Jaime hit him flush at the same tie that Jay caught him. He landed comfortably and saw that Jaime did so too, and once again he felt the sense of excitement in the crowd diminish. This hadn't been a joust for the ages, and it needed to be more than this. "My sword," he called out loudly and heard the crowd cheer as Jaime did the same. He saw Robert moving to the edge of his seat, as did others when he and Jaime stood face to face. While he may not have given them the ride they wished for, he could give them a fight they'd talk about for some time, and as he took his stance he smirked when Jaime tapped the ground 3 times. "Good fortune, Sir John," Jaime said. "Good fortune, Lord Jaime," he replied, and the fight began. He and Jaime had spars which lasted over an hour, and others only a few moments. This was more of a fight, though, and he knew it wouldn't be a quick one. He parried the blows and moved to the side to aim his own, feigning and thrusting at the same time before spinning away from Jaime's riposte. Jaime hit home the first and second points after a few minutes, but Jay felt himself loosen up and began to move freer and more quickly than he had been. Thrust, parry, thrust, spin, attack from the left and spin, then right and feign a spin before attacking with a flurry. When he caught Jaime's shoulder, he saw the wince and knew he could take the day, feigning to go for it again and forcing Jaime to overcompensate to cover it up. The 2 blows he caught him with were on the left side, and he heard Jaime chuckle as they backed off and began again. Jaime soon catching him in the stomach with a strike that would have ended him were he not armored up. The crowd cheered even more loudly when Jay began to throw in more jumps and spins, Jaime easily parrying them all, but he knew how they'd look to those watching on. The riposte hit caught Jaime on the shoulder once more and gave Jay the edge he needed, once again concentrating on the other side while Jaime protected his injured shoulder, and Jay felt sorry for the stiffness and pain he knew he'd feel on the morrow. With the score at 4-3 in his favor, he moved in for the kill. Feigning sweeping Jaime's legs and making him fall on his injured shoulder allowed him to take the roll without a strike back. When Jaime realized he was behind him, it was too late, and Jay held the sword to the back of his head and heard the crowd cheer. "Yield?" he asked. And Jaime nodded. "I yield, Sir John. The day is yours," Jaime said, and Jay removed his sword and asked him how bad his shoulder was hurt. "It's a bruise, John, nothing more. Your graces, my lords and ladies, I give you the winner of the joust of the Tourney of King's Landing, 297 AC, Sir Jon Snow." Robb came running with Tommen and Winter and helped him to mount back up before handing him the lance. And Jay rode to where the garland rested, the crowd going silent when he turned back around. He knew what he should do, and yet he could not. Propriety and position be damned, he thought as he rode to where Margaery sat. "Lady Margaery, I would name you the Queen of Love and Beauty," he said to fevered whispers, and then some cheers when she took the garland and placed it on her head. "You honor me, Sir John, and I thank you for this and for your rescue from my attacker. You, sir, are a true knight, and any lady would be proud to be named queen by one such as yourself," Margaery said with a beaming smile, and as he nodded and rode away, he heard the cheers and felt the favor at his hip. She hadn't taken the flowers off since she'd put them in her hair after the joust. All the way back in the carriage and now sitting in her room, looking at herself in the looking-glass, she still wore them. Them, and a smile she'd not been able to remove from her face from the moment Jon had taken the day. She'd felt her heart in her mouth when he was unhorsed, only to see that Jaime was too, and then for them to face each other with their swords. While the crowd hadn't enjoyed the final joust, for her it was the greatest she'd ever seen, and though it had taken the sword fight for the crowd to get excited, it hadn't dimmed her own. To see Jon beat Jaime and then to ride to the garland had been incredible. and she'd felt her heart race the closer he came to her. A part of her cried out in the back of her mind for him to ride past to crown Joy or Sansa, and yet the largest part of her wished for him to do what he did. Feeling the eyes of the crowd all on her and him had brought up her attack and the fact that it had been Jon who had saved her from it. Knowing that while there would be those outraged that he'd dare crown her, more would see it simply an extension of that. Jon being a true knight, not only rescuing a lady in distress, but crowning her to help relieve that distress also. So wrapped up was she in looking at herself that Margaery didn't hear the door open or her grandmother come in. "You two were not as careful as I'd hoped," her grandmother said admonishingly. "What did you expect me to do, grandmother? Refuse them?" She replied snippily. "No, but you cannot over-celebrate getting them, Margaery. Not tonight at the feast. Bring them with you. Wear them and dance with Jon, but just the once. You must seem like you're grateful for what he did, but not that you had hoped he'd crown you." "Throne," her grandmother said. "Very well, grandmother," she said with more bite than she had intended. "Margaery," her grandmother said, and she found she wasn't in the mood to be lectured. "I said very well, I've agreed to do as you've asked. Can I at least enjoy the fact that my husband crowned me, grandmother? Can I at least take comfort in that?" She said and saw her grandmother nod before she hesitated and then left the room. She hadn't meant to snap at her, as she knew her grandmother was only looking out for them both, but she had wished to enjoy it just a little longer. Reaching up to her head, she took the garland off and placed it on the table. She then stood up and walked over to her wardrobe, looking through the dresses to pick out the one for the evening. She smiled when she saw the red and black one. Margaery had never worn it, and she soon found herself looking forward to the day when she could properly wear the colors of her and her husband's house. After bathing and dressing in a green and gold dress, she made her way to Sansa's room to find her friend already dressed and laughing with Mira and Mega, Eleanor soon joining them. Sansa looked at the garland in her hand and reached out to take it from her, placing it carefully in her hair. She smiled at her as they turned to walk to the carriages. Seeing Loras as they arrived at the Red Keep, Margaery was at first happy, as it would be the first time she'd really had a chance to speak to her brother since he was knighted. That he'd waited outside for them did, though, worry her for a moment. But he seemed relaxed, and when he came over to them, he told them that he'd been asked to meet them. "Lord Jaime said I should arrive with my family, but we worried that we'd miss you," Loras said. "Well then, good sir, would you escort us ladies inside? I feel we'll all benefit from a knight's company," she said, and Loras chuckled as he took her and Mega by the arm. Arriving at the great hall, they were announced and walked in to find the room almost full, only the royal family not having arrived yet, and she quickly looked to see where Jon was. She found him easily enough sitting with the younger Lannisters and between Martin and Joy, all of them laughing as Jon kept softly slapping Martin on the back. At the announcement of their arrival, though, he looked to them and she saw him smile when he saw her wear the garland, giving her a small nod and then a sly wink which made her giggle. They were no sooner in their seats than the king and queen arrived along with the rest of the royal family, and Margaery cringed when she saw the prince look her way. The smile on his face belied by the way his eyes hardened when they saw the garland on her head. The first dish was sent to the Lannister table, and she heard her grandmother say to Willis that it was Jon and not the Lannisters the king was acknowledging. Looking to the table, she saw the king raise his glass, proving her grandmother's words true yet again. "You look beautiful, sister. Never before have I seen a queen who deserved it more," Loras said, as she reached out and took his hand in her own, squeezing it before letting it go. "I thank you, Loras, and you make a handsome and worthy knight, and we're all so very proud of you," she said, and saw her brother swallow a little uncomfortably. "I had no idea he planned that. I had hoped to be knighted by Lord Jaime, and I knew one day he may, but I had no idea it was to be today." "You deserved it, brother," she said a little too loudly. "What? Who deserved it?" her father asked, and she looked to see him looking at them both. "Loras, father. He deserved to be honored so, to be knighted by Lord Jaime," she said, and she saw her father's eyes fill up with pride. "That he did to Loras," her father said, and they all reached out and took their glasses, raising a toast to the newly anointed knight. Eating the meal was almost a chore after that. Not that she wasn't hungry or that she didn't enjoy it, but that she wished to get it over with and for the music to start. Each time she'd looked to John's table, she'd seen him look to her own, and when it finally came time for the dancing, she waited eagerly for him to come over. Tradition allowed for the winner of the joust to ask the woman he crowned for the first dance, and it then allowed for all the others to join, so when she saw him walk to her, she smiled. "Lady Margaery, would you honor me with this dance?" John asked, and she nodded as she stood up. "I would, Sir John." She ignored the rest of the room and instead just concentrated on John as they danced, he looking into her eyes each time he turned her a certain way. "Grandmother says tonight we should only do this once," she said softly. "She's probably right. Others will seek to dance with the Queen of Love and Beauty, and though I'd not wish them to do so, I'll not deny you the opportunity to be feted as you deserve." "I don't wish to dance with another, John," she said, and saw him smirk. "No, just this, John," he said, and she felt like slapping his shoulder, such was the look on his face. "You are not funny," she said, biting her cheek. "I'm very funny. Perhaps my lady wishes me to prove it. I can act the fool if that's her desire. Shall I make faces?" he said as he hollowed out his cheeks. Margaery shaking her head as she laughed. "John," she said reproachfully, and he stopped and looked at her far more seriously, and she found herself staring at his lips as he spoke. "This will be the last time we hide, Margaery. Next time we stand in this hall, everyone will know the truth. On that you have my vow," he said. And she nodded as the song ended. She watched as John danced with Sansa and as he danced with Joy, while she was asked to dance by Lord Renly, who she was glad to see favored one of his arms. The Lord's small talk made more bearable by the grimaces each time she pressed down a little too hard. When John was called to the king, she heard little of the conversation, only seeing the king laugh and Prince Tommen look on with eagerness, his expression far different than his brother or mother's, and when she heard the cough behind her later on, she knew who it would be. "My lady, it would be an honor to dance with the most beautiful woman in all the realm," Joffrey said, smiling as he offered her his hand. "I thank you, my prince," she said reluctantly, taking it. As they danced, she looked over the prince's shoulder to the table where John was sitting. His eyes were focused on her, and she wished so much that she could smile at him and yet knew she could not. Instead, she plastered a fake one on her face and listened as the prince prattled on about how he would have crowned her true and at least not dishonored her as the bastard had. How she kept her composure she didn't know, but she was glad when the dance was over and she could take her seat, turning down the next two that were offered and only accepting when Loras asked her to take to the floor. Even then, it was more to keep away from the annoying people who kept coming her way. She did smile when she saw John lead Prince Tommen to his table, the boy blushing adorably when asking Joy to dance. When the night finally ended, she was glad to be heading back to the manse, and even more so to see Ghost sitting in the garden with Fang waiting for her. While not the same as laying in bed with her husband, she had found her night since the attack far better with Ghost beside her than without. King's Landing, 297 AC. Robert Baratheon. His head hurt as he stood in the privy and pissed. Once he was done, he staggered to his bed and readied himself for the day. Who the girl was the night before, he had no idea, but he was glad she was gone when he woke up this morning. After dressing, he walked to the dining room to find his wife and children already there breaking their fast, his daughter giving him a bright smile which he returned as he sat down. It wasn't until he was eating the bacon that he noticed the looks on the face of his sons and his wife. Joffrey was sitting with a smug smile while Cersei switched from that to glaring at his other son. As for Tommen, his expression surprised him. Never before had he seen him so angry, and for some reason it made him feel a tingle of pride, something he'd been feeling more and more of with Tommen lately. "Will you be meeting up with Sir John today, Tommen, during some practices?" he asked, and his son tore his eyes away from his mother and looked to him, the fire in his eyes taking him aback for a moment. "Mother says now that the tourney is over, I have no need to be with Sir John, father," Tommen said. "What's that now?" he asked, looking to his wife. "My love, we agreed that Tommen could squire for Jon Snow for the tourney. It's over now. I think it's time we found him a more suitable knight." Cersei said with a smile that always seemed to raise his ire. Who's more suitable than the winner of the melee and the joust? He said, looking to see Tommen nod his agreement. We agreed, Robert, Cersei said. Aye, we agreed. And then the lad won both events, with our son serving as his squire. Who was there better for Tommen to learn from than such a knight? He said, and was surprised when Tommen answered before Cersei could. He also helped train our cousin Martin, who won the squire's melee father. Sir John told me that he could train me to be just as good. Tommen said, and Robert found himself smiling at the thoughts of seeing at least one of his sons compete. I'm sure he could. He said and glared at Joffrey when he snorted. Far better than any attempts to train your brother anyway. Robert, Cersei exclaimed loudly. What? At least one of my sons should be able to wield a damn sword. Far better he learns it from someone who beat the damn Kingslayer. He said, laughing as he did so. You would see our son shamed so. Shamed to be squired to a bastard? Cersei said angrily. Ned's lad. Not any ordinary bastard. Ned's lad a damn fine knight. Did you not hear the cheers, woman? Were you not at the feast last night where lords were complimenting me on my son being a part of Sir John's victory? He's a bastard, Robert. Piss on that. He's a fucking knight, and the best one I've seen in many a year. Gods, his father beat Sir Arthur Dayne, and Ned wasn't half the swordsman that his boy is. I can go speak with him, father? Tommen asked excitedly. Aye. He's to come here today to collect his prize and wagers, so go spend the day with him and let me think on this, he said. And the hug he got from his son was worth the look of contempt he got from his wife. If he thought after breaking his fast his day would go any smoother, then he was soon shown it would not. Soon, finding himself visited by Jon Arryn and Littlefinger, though he took a certain sense of comfort from the fact that he'd tucked Littlefinger up good and proper the day before. The fool making a series of wagers against Ned's boy leading to the last one, when it was as he faced the Kingslayer with a sword. Another wager, your grace? Littlefinger said, and Robert laughed. I've taken all your coin. Lord Baelish, you already owe me more than 3,000 gold dragons. Are you sure you can afford more? He said, drinking his wine and watching as Tommen and Ned's other lad carried the sword to Jon Snow. How about double or nothing, your grace? I win. I'm clear and you win. You keep what I've lost and I'll add this. Littlefinger said, holding up the dagger. Aye, I'll take that wager, Robert said, eyeing up the Valyrian steel of the blade. Feeling his hand go to his hip where it now rested, he found himself smirking when Littlefinger saw it, though the smile soon fell from his face with Jon's words and his tone. You can't do this, Robert, I forbid it, Jon Arryn said, and Robert felt his anger rise. Forbid, you forget who wears the crown here. Jon, and what exactly is it you forbid me from doing? He said, and was happy to see Jon look abashed. Making Tommen squire to Sir John. You can't, Robert, the way it looks. Why, if Tommen was to earn his spurs from such a knight? Jon Arryn said, shaking his head angrily. Such a knight. The best damn warriors since Sir Arthur, they say. Hell, even were I to have faced the lad with my hammer, I'd struggle. Such a knight indeed. Did you not hear the crowd, Jon? Hear them cheer, 4 and 10, and he beat the fucking bold himself, not to mention beating the Kingslayer with a damn sword in his hands. He said loudly, I believe Lord Jon refers to his birth, my lord, not his knighthood. Littlefinger said with a smile that he liked not. My best friend's son, Littlefinger. And don't you fucking forget it, knighted by my own damn hands. Were that not enough? There's also the fact I've not seen my boy so excited by something other than a damn cat in years. He said, smiling once again at the image of Tommen with a sword in his hand. Robert, you must reconsider, Jon Arryn said. Must I? Not only is he damn worthy, but where is he based? Jon, Baelish, where? Casterly Rock, your grace, Littlefinger said. Aye, with Tommen's family, Jon, hell, I'd have fucking probably fostered him there anyway, so no. I'll not reconsider. After they left, he poured himself some wine and then thought better of it, instead finding himself walking through the halls with Sir Aerys at his back. When he reached the windows overlooking the sparring yard, he looked down, hoping for a glimpse of his boy, and found him standing there with a wooden sword. Leaning closer, he looked down as Sir John showed him some moves, and Tommen began to match them, the smile on his face growing ever larger as he watched. Damn, then, all. If they thought him wrong on this, he was in the right of it. King's Landing, 297 AC. J. Harry's Targaryen. He had hated the feast other than his one dance with Margaery, and being able to freely speak to some men he had not been able to publicly until now. Raymond and Montfort were there, and he spoke briefly to Lord Rowan, Lord Ashford, Sir Baelor, and Sir John Fossaway, all congratulating him on the day, and Jay doing his best to try and judge them in the limited time he spent talking to them. With Montfort and Raymond, he arranged a meeting for the next day, and did the same with Lord Tarley. He spoke to Willis and asked him to attend on his grandmother's behalf, and to explain it to Olenna later. He then danced with Sansa and with Joy, and spoke briefly to Prince Tommen and Princess Myrcella. Seeing Margaery dance with other men was difficult, and with Prince Joffrey it was worrying, yet each time he looked to her he smiled, and was happy to see her smiling too. Eventually, he was able to take his leave when Margaery did so, and he found himself eager for his bed. When he woke the next morning, he broke his fast with Jaime and Geryon and asked Geryon to attend the meeting later. Jaime going to it would create too much suspicion were anyone to look. He, Loras, Cregan, and Brienne then made their way to the Red Keep to spar and spend the morning before he needed to present himself at court that day. Looking up the balcony, he smiled when he saw Margaery and Sansa look down, with Joy leaning against the wall shouting encouragement as he and Loras sparred. "I swear you don't even try against the others, you save it all for me, don't you?" Loras said with a chuckle when Jay took the match. "What can I say? I try, Loras," he said, and watched as Loras motioned to behind him. Sir John, Tommen said, running fast towards him. "My prince?" he said, looking to Sir Barristan, who walked briskly behind the prince. "Sir John, father, he says I can be your squire, for true, not just for the tourney." Tommen said almost breathlessly, and yet with a beaming smile, and whether it was the shock in his face that it had been this easy, or his own worry, Tommen's expression soon changed. "You will have me as your squire, won't you, Sir John?" the prince asked worriedly. "I'd be honored, my prince. Why, without you, maybe we'd have had to watch Loras give out more roses," he said with a wink, and Tommen looked to Loras before laughing. "No fair, John," Loras said, acting as if he was hurt. "Oh, poor Loras," he said, grabbing Loras in a hug while rolling his eyes at Tommen and making the boy laugh some more. After speaking to Barristan, who seemed unaware of this turn of events, and then speaking to Tommen about the realities, letting him know it would mean they'd soon be leaving the city. Jay was happy to see the prince's enthusiasm undiminished, and when Tommen asked if he would give him a lesson, he was glad to. The prince had rarely held a sword, but he seemed a quick enough study, and soon Jay had him making moves and correcting his stance, Tommen quickly adapting to what he was told. "I believe it's time we saw the king, Sir John," Sir Barristan said, and Jay nodded as he wiped his brow with the damp cloth and they headed inside. The throne room was full to capacity, and sitting on the throne, Robert seemed for once to be sober, smiling when he saw him. Barristan and Tommen walk in. Looking around, Jay could see Jaime and Daisy, Jenna and Kevin and Olenna, all of them close, but not too close. He stood at the back of the room and directed Tommen to stand with him, the prince looking from where his family sat to where he was, and then to Jay, who nodded. "Sir Jon Snow, come forward so your king can reward you," Robert said, and Jay turned to Tommen and motioned for him to walk with him. "Stand by my shoulder, my prince," he whispered, and Tommen nodded. "Sir John, you have my congratulations on your victories in the melee and the joust, though I am loath to pay you the wager you won," Robert said with a laugh. "I got lucky, your grace, though. If what Prince Tommen tells me is true, I believe coin is not my biggest boon this day," he said, and Robert laughed as he looked to his son. "Couldn't keep it to yourself, son," Robert said, laughing once more. "No, Sir John, coin is not the boon I wish to bestow on you. My son came to me and asked to be your squire. Not just as in the tourney, but until he's ready to be knighted. What say you, Sir John? Do you accept this boon from your king? Jay took a knee and looked to the throne, watching as every eye in the room looked to him and Robert, looking surprised but pleased as he watched him. I am humbled by this honor, your grace, truly, he said, and Robert laughed. Stand up, lad, Tommen, come here, Robert said, and Jay looked on as Robert reached down to his hip. A gift fit for a prince, Robert said as he handed Tommen the dagger. Jay looking from Tommen's excited face to the dragon bone hilt and the shining Valyrian steel. When Tommen walked back to him, Jay bowed and went to leave, but Robert was having none of it. My lords and ladies, I give you the winner of the melee and the joust, Sir Jon Snow and his squire Prince Tommen Baratheon, Robert said to loud claps and cheers. After some other winners were called forward and Robert called Barristan to him, he and Tommen were then asked to join the king for lunch. Jay sitting as Robert told war stories and glad he didn't mention the trident. Once done, Tommen and Barristan were asked to stay and Jay made his way from the room. He was walking through the corridors when he passed Sir Richard and Princess Marcella. Sir John, the princess said with a frown when she saw him, and Jay wondered why she looked at him that way until it hit him a moment later. Princess, Sir Richard, he said with a bow. Is it true that you'll be leaving soon, you and Tommen? The girl asked softly. Aye, it is my princess, he said, seeing the frown appear once more. Perhaps you could come and visit us, princess. Casterly Rock is not that far by ship, and apart from your brother, I'm sure your cousins would be most happy to see you, he said with a smile. Do you really think so, Sir John? She asked, smiling. I know Lord Jaime and Lady Dacey would like nothing more than to see you, as would Joanna and Joy, with Tommen there. Also, it only makes more reason for a visit, does it not? It does, and Tommen's name day is but a few moons away. I could come for that, thank you, Sir John. I'll speak to father, she said, almost skipping away, Sir Richard giving him a warm smile as he walked after her. He needed to speak to Jenna and tell her about his conversation with the princess. Neither of them had so far been able to come up with a believable excuse for why Marcella could leave. Jaime suggesting a fostering somewhere close to Bran, and while it would have made sense if Bran was fostering, it didn't so much with him squiring. He walked through the halls to where Arthur was waiting, the knight relieved to see him unharmed. No guards had been allowed into the royal apartments, but he walked with Barristan and he had felt under no threat. Sir Daemon, I believe we've somewhere else we need to be, he said, and Arthur nodded as they headed off to the meeting with the others. King's Landing, 297 AC. Barristan, standing in the room watching the king laugh with the stag, was hard, and he wondered how Jon could do it. Though each time he caught his eye, he could see the mummery was taking its toll. He was glad when the lunch was over, and then surprised when he and Tommen were asked to stay, soon finding out what it was that was on Robert's mind. After talking to Tommen and making sure this was what he really wished for, and then saying that he'd come visit him as soon as he could, Robert asked the prince to leave, and turned to him as soon as he'd gone. My wife thinks I'm mad, Sir Barristan. She and Jon both think I've taken leave of my senses. What do you think? Robert asked. I don't feel qualified to answer your grace. For fuck's sake, Barristan, I'm asking you a question, Sir Jon. Do you think him a worthy knight? A more than worthy knight, your grace. A knight the realm has not seen in an age, he said with a smile, and saw the king nod at him. My own thoughts exactly. Sir, however, my wife will have my hide unless I send you with Tommen. Damn the woman. She wishes me to send away my Lord Commander to protect my son when he's in no danger at all. The king said, drinking a glass of wine. I understand not the mind of a mother, your grace. I do agree there is no danger to Prince Tommen, but perhaps it can be a temporary thing. Have her see you adhere to her concerns, and then in time make other arrangements, he said. And Robert looked to him and laughed. Gods, I've wasted you. For years I kept you out of the small council even though it was your right. I thought you too close to the dragons and couldn't bear to hear you defend them, Robert said and held his hand up when he went to speak. You should go say your goodbyes to your brothers, Sir Barristan. I know not when Sir John leaves, but take the day to make yourself ready. I shall protect him with my life, your grace, he said as he turned to leave. Protect them both. Sir Barristan, Ned's lad also, Robert said, and Barristan nodded as he left. He checked in with Tommen and found him with his sister, Sir Richard, on guard, and he looked to see Sir Mandon, Sir Jousting, and Sir Preston also on duty. Calling Sir Mandon from the king's door, he stood with Sir Richard and waited. Sir Mandon grabbed some guards and watched the prince and princess until Sir Richard returns, he said, and the knight barely looked at him when he nodded. Sir Richard, if you'll follow me. He walked to White Sword Tower with Sir Richard walking beside him. He could have had this conversation outside the prince and princess's room, but he wished to have it only once. Once in the tower, he walked to Sir Aris's room to find the knight only readying himself to go to bed. Feeling thankful that he'd not had to wake him, Barristan asked him to join them in the round room. He poured each of them a mug of water and grabbed some bread and cheese. Sir Richard, the only one of them eating, and Barristan smiled at that, well used to feeling hungry on duty. His Grace has named Prince Tommen Esquire to Sir Jon Snow. The prince will be leaving when Sir Jon heads back to Casterly Rock, and as per her Grace's request, I'm to accompany them, he said. And Sir Richard looked to him. But you're the Lord Commander. Surely this is a job for someone else? Sir Aris said. It is, as the Queen's request. Sir Aris, I don't know myself yet when the ship will be leaving. I'll need to speak to Sir Jon to find out the details, and I'll speak to the others before I go. As of now, I remain Lord Commander, but with me gone there may be a push to replace me. Know that. Until I'm replaced, my orders still can only be superseded by the king's own, and so here they are, he said, and both men looked to him. Lord Commander? Sir Richard said when Barristan hesitated. Protect the princess as you have been doing, Sir Richard. You too, Sir Aris. I fear for her alone here now with Prince Joffrey back, and I leave it to your judgment on how best to keep her safe, he said. Lord Commander? Sir Richard asked, his face full of confusion. We've all seen that boy, Sir Richard, what he did in Highgarden. Apparently Lord Stannis also fears for his daughter around him. We've been able to protect her from him up to now, but as he gets older it may prove more difficult. While I'm away, I wish you both to continue to do as you have been, and to know that I am always on your side, he said. And both Sir Richard and Sir Aris nodded. When Sir Aris made his way back to his bed and Sir Richard left, Barristan began to ready his things, looking around and wondering when it was he would be back here in this place. He smiled as he imagined sitting at the table with Arthur again, and then he got up to head to the Lannister manse to find out when they'd be leaving, knowing that in a day or so he'd finally be at his king's side properly for the first time. King's Landing, 297 AC. Robb. Even though they were getting ready to leave in the next day or so, he found that he had far too much time on his hands. He'd expected to be rushed off his feet during the tourney and wished now that he'd competed in the joust, just for something extra to do. Jon seemed to have no time, and while he knew his brother envied the time he got to spend with Winifred, Robb found himself envying his brother over the number of things he got to do. He was sitting with Winifred and Willa in the garden of the manse, thinking on that, when Lord Wyman walked in holding a letter in his hand. From your father, Robb, it seems it's to Winterfell and not White Harbor we've to go, Wyman said, handing him the note. He looked at the Lord, wondering what reason his father would have for them to go, and why Wyman was smiling when he spoke to his granddaughters, and opening the note quickly he began to read, finding the news to be both shocking and unsurprising at the same time. Robb, I had hoped to have you come home and to tell you this news to your face, but given the tourney and my own inability to attend, I've been left with no choice but to tell you it this way. After receiving your mother's blessing and to follow my own heart, I've asked, and Elle has accepted to be my wife. I hope you and your brothers and sisters can travel to the wedding, and I look forward to seeing you all again. I wish I could have spoken to you previously, son, but I hope I can speak to you when you arrive. Your father, Ned. His first instinct was to stand up and tear the letter in two, to storm off and make his way to the Red Keep and speak to his mother and tell her that he'd not accept this. Though it was but a fleeting one, He knew his mother and father would not be getting back together, and his father claimed his mother's permission, which Robb found strange. Not that was the only thing he had found strange about his mother since he'd seen her again. How she had acted when he and Sansa had met her made him believe that he didn't know her at all. He wondered if his father had felt the same, and that's why things had ended how they had between them. Robb, is there something wrong?" Winifred asked, and he shook his head, handing her the letter to read. "I need to go speak to Sansa. I'll be back as soon as I can," he said a moment later, kissing her cheek as Wyman nodded to his guards to follow him. He was glad of the walk through the streets as it allowed him time to gather his thoughts and to think how he truly felt about this, his mind going to places he didn't wish it to. But he was unable to stop it from. That his mother hated Jon was clear. It was clear when he was in Winterfell, and it was clear now. And though his father hadn't truly blamed it on that, Robb knew that their parting was at least partly because of Jon. Sansa had told him that they couldn't trust her with Jon's truth, and the last meeting they'd had with her had proved that, and now he imagined his father had felt the same. But that didn't lead to marrying someone else, and he began to try and think why that was. Was it simply his father had fallen for another woman? Was there more to it than that? As he saw the guards at the gates of the Tyrell Manse, he felt he needed to speak to his father to find out, though he hoped Sansa could offer some insight too. "I'm here to see my sister, Lady Sansa," he said, and the guards nodded before he was brought inside. He found her sitting in her room with Fang and reading the same letter he had read, something he was glad about as he needed her to be aware of it and didn't wish to be the one to inform her. "You got one too," he said with a smile. "Aye. Looks like we're going to Winterfell, brother," she said, and he nodded. "I don't understand this, Sansa, any of this," he said, and he was glad when she got up from her bed and walked over to him. "Sit down, Robb, we've much to speak on," she said as she took his hand, and he looked to her and allowed her to lead him to the bed. "There are things you don't know about Mother, things I've only just realized. I think we need to discuss them with Father, and once you know, you'll see it more clearly," she said. "What things?" he asked. "Things I think it's best to hear far from here," she said, and he found himself staring at her. "Sansa, trust me, Robb, this is not where you wish to find them out," she said, and he nodded. They spoke for a few more moments, Sansa asking if he thought Bran got the letter, and when he said he must have, she suggested they ask their granduncle to join them on the ship. After she said she'd take care of it, they talked to Winifred and his own wedding, Robb blushing when his sister began asking him questions of whether he was looking forward to it, did he wish it was sooner. When he was ready to leave, he hugged her and kissed her cheek, and as he got to the door, he stopped and turned. "Sansa, these things, are they bad?" he asked, and she nodded and didn't say a word, her face all the answer he needed. Arriving back at the manse, he found that Jon had still not returned, and Winifred had almost seemed to be waiting for him to do so. Robb smiling when she appeared almost as soon as he had arrived, and more so when she wouldn't leave him alone until she was sure he wasn't upset. Soon, he found he cared less and less as he changed the subject from his father's to their wedding. Lying in his bed that night, he found himself thinking much happier thoughts than otherwise he probably should. King's Landing, 297 AC. Jerian. That he was asked to attend this meeting was both comforting and worrying, something he confided in Ashara as soon as he could. When he did, he was surprised to find she'd been invited to a meeting of her own, and he found himself laughing at the thoughts of it. Both of them were completely on Jon's side, and while he knew a war was to come, it had been a far-off idea until now, a thought not yet fully expressed. Now it was getting more real, and where at one time he'd have almost hungered for it, now he felt a little scared by it. The life he had was very different from the life he'd lived before. His keep, his daughter, Ashara. Now he had far too much to lose. That Jon cared for Joy, for him and Ashara as much as he did, while it proved how right they were to support him, it only added to what could be lost. So as he walked into the room, he felt nervous, as the reality of what they were doing finally began to hit home. Looking around the room, they found he was the only one who felt this way. Willis looked almost eager, and Raymond and Montfort even more so, Richard looked ready to fight even now. Jon, though, stood out amongst them all, and not even the stern expression on Randall Tarley's face matched the look on Jon's. "I want to thank you all for coming here. I know how difficult and dangerous it is, in this city above all," Jon said, and he saw a nod from Randall as he spoke. "Is this everyone, Your Grace?" Randall asked a moment later, and Jon smirked. "We couldn't fit everyone. My lord and I specifically picked those in this room. Here it's just a meeting to discuss trade. Everyone apart from you is already tied into our trading routes, and we'll soon see Horn Hill rewarded more deservedly," Jon said, and he saw him look to Willis, who nodded to Randall. "My nephew, or Lord Willis's grandmother, together with the others in this room, would be far too obvious, Lord Tarley, but I'll leave it to Jon to explain the rest," he said, and smirked at Jon's expression. "I have the West Lord Tarley through my hand, Jaime Lannister, and the North through my uncle Eddard. I have Doran through my uncles Oberyn and Doran, and the Reach through Lady Olenna. Lord Derry and Lord Valerian have declared, and once I leave this city, Sir Richard will reach out to the rest of the loyal houses," Jon said, and Randall looked to the room to see if anyone disagreed. "Which leaves the Vale, Riverlands, and the Stormlands against us, my king," Randall said. "The Vale and the Stormlands will support their lords and king. But you've seen Lord Tully. Do you think he'll have more luck than his father in bringing the Riverlands to bear?" "I don't, Your Grace," Randall said. "I have the men, my lord, and more will come, but I have something more than even that. I have dragons," Jon said, and Randall laughed before he realized no one else was. "I've seen them, my lord, as has Lord Geryon and every man in this room," Willis said, and Randall looked to Jon once more. "I'd call for a council if I thought it would do any good, but I know it would not. The throne will need to be taken, and so take it I will," Jon said, looking to the room. "When I leave this city, we prepare in earnest. Arm your men and ready them for war, my lords, for war is coming, and it comes soon." "When, my king?" Lord Montfort asked. "Within 6 moons, Lord Montfort. There are some more people to be told, and with that comes greater risk. If we're lucky, we manage to find only loyal men. But even with loyalty, there comes the chance of discovery," Jon said to nods. "But we need a battle plan, Your Grace, a plan of attack," Randall said. "And we will have more than one, my lord, but not here today. I will listen to counsel, and before this war starts we'll have more than one disagreement." "I'm sure," Jon said to Laps. "The other lords of the Reach will be told in good time. Lord Tarley, and I'm sure you'll wish to discuss things with Lord Rowan and Ashford," Willis said, and Randall nodded. "My father made an error many years ago. He assumed that change can come by way of peace, and would that it was so. Each man in this room knows the truth of it, and has suffered loss because of that mistake. I'll not make the same mistake. My lords, my family can't afford any more of them. I give you my oath. I will do everything in my power to ensure we come through this war as one, that the loyalty you've shown will be rewarded, and the future we seek to create will be better than the past or present we've lived through," Jon said. As Geryon looked to each man in the room, he saw them look to Jon, who stood up and closed his eyes before opening them again. "I swear it, my lords, for my father, my mother, for my brother and sister, and for their mother, for everyone they took from me, I swear they'll pay in fire and blood," Jon said. "Fire and blood." "Blood," Raymond and Montfort said, and then Randall. Willis and Richard joined in. He was asked to stay with Sir Richard and Lord Raymond, the Derry Lord looking at Jon and wondering why he was held back when the others were not. "Lord Raymond, your position is the most precarious of all. The war will come to the Riverlands first, as they always do, and while I hope for most of the lords to abandon Lord Edmure, those who don't will come after those who do. Robert, too, may seek to take your house, so I need you to do something for me," Jon said, and Raymond nodded. "Anything, Your Grace." "Peek this close," Jon said, handing him a cage with a small bird inside. "Your Grace?" Raymond asked confusedly. "Should you find yourself in trouble, talk to the bird. My lord, ask it for help," Jon said, and Geryon chuckled while Richard smirked. "I don't understand, Your Grace," Raymond said. "Richard, John said as he walked from the room. Geryon watched as Richard brought Raymond to the cage and told him to whisper something to the bird. What he said was so low that Geryon couldn't hear, and once he was done, Richard called to the door, John walking back in a moment later. Sir Willem was a good man, and true, Sir Jonathor was a loyal knight who gave his life for the father. I seek to serve the son, John said, and Raymond gasped. I'm a warg, Lord Raymond, and I'll be able to come and help if called. I thank you, your grace, Raymond said, and John smiled. My family owes yours a debt of blood. Lord Raymond, I'll repay that debt if I can. When Raymond left, Geryon saw John as he seemed to relax against the chair, his eyes looking to his as he did so. Sir. Richard left them alone, and John kept looking at him, almost unnerving him as he did so. I wish it didn't have to be this way, to put so many I care about it in harm's way. I'd order you all to stay at home if I thought you'd listen, John said. And Geryon watched him sigh. I know. We take no chances. Geryon, or as little as we must, if need be, I'll destroy him with Rainix. We take no chances, John said, and Geryon nodded as he walked over to him. Come. It's getting late. Joy will be waiting for her story, he said, and saw John smile as he stood up. She will. Valeria, 297 AC. Rainix. Flying further into the city, she could see what it once looked like. The sky once filled with dragons where now there was just her and Lagaron. They swooped through the towers and broken buildings, over what had once been arenas and temples to the gods. When they saw it, they knew that was where they had to go, and the dragon pit in King's Landing looked like a small space in comparison to the giant open space of this one. Landing on the ground, she looked around, and then she saw why they had been brought here. They were everywhere, and Rainix knew instinctively which one to go for, as did Lagaron. She walked towards it and moved it over and saw the thing which lay underneath, the sun reflecting off it as she looked down upon it. Turning to Lagaron, she saw that he too had found something similar, and as she looked around the dragon pit, she wondered if each of them covered even more. Her curiosity forced her to move towards another, and as she moved it, she found even more of the shiny steel. This was important, she knew, but they could do nothing about it, and she knew then they would need to return. Could they, though? Could she bring Jay here? Should she bring Jay here? The questions remained unanswered for now, and instead, she moved back to what had brought her here and grabbed it in her legs to lift it. Lagaron struggled to grab his in his mouth, and she had him drag it to her. Holding it in her legs, she took to the air and found the weight to be no problem at all. I'll carry them. When we feed, you'll need to catch the prey, she said. I will. We must come back here, my rider father. They need to come, Lagaron said, and she nodded as the daylight began to fade. We'll sleep and leave on the morrow, she said. And Lagaron seemed happy enough with that answer for now. It wasn't Jay who came to her that night, and it wasn't a place she recognized that she walked. The streets were paved with black stone, and around, her people looked at her as if they could see her. She walked on, and finally heard the sound of a harp playing, and as she followed it, she saw them in the distance. Her mother was sitting by a tree as her father played his harp, Lyanna dancing while her mother rocked Aegon in her arms. Mother, she called out, and saw the smile on her face as she looked to her. And looking down, she saw she was a girl once more. Her little legs ran as fast as she could, and she felt the tears as they fell from her mother's eyes. She heard Aegon giggle as her hair touched his face, and Lyanna moved towards her when her father stopped playing his harp. My little girl, look at you, her mother said, and Rainix closed her eyes when she felt her fingers touch her face. Mother, I've missed you, she said, and her mother brushed her fingers over her lips as she spoke. We've missed you too, Rainix, you and your brother, her father said, as she turned her head to look at him. Father, I didn't know. I'd have brought Jay if I'd known, she said, and her father smiled before he shook his head. It's not time yet for your brother to come. One day we'll all be together again, but not today, her father said. What you found, Rainix, what you found. He needs to know what you found, but only he can come. Ligarin can't bring his rider, only Jay can come, Lyanna said, and Rhaenys nodded. Only Jay, she said as she woke up and saw the sun begin to rise. They took to the sky once more, and she carried them underneath her, turning back to look at the towers in the distance, and knowing that she would be coming back. Ligaron hadn't argued with her when she told him that only she and Jay were to return, that Tyrion was not to come here. It had surprised her at first, and then she wondered if he'd seen something too, though her brother would tell her nothing when she asked. They slept outside Volantis that night, Ligeron going to find them food and bringing her back half his own kill. Rainix woke early, and it was still dark when they took to the air. Ligeron, unhappy that she'd woken him, but she'd felt men close by and they needed to be elsewhere, and so it was to the sea they flew. Over Lys and Sunspear, and to the deserts beyond, Rainix smiled as the saddle she carried between her legs alone making the journey worthwhile. King's Landing, 297. AC, Jenna. She made her way to the manse and was glad of the break in her daily routine. Emmon was being his usual annoying self, and she found the smell in the city to be making her long for home. That she didn't feel safe here didn't help, and despite their guards, it was more a feeling than any true sense of danger. Each day they got closer to the giant staking his claim was a day that she felt it a little more keenly. Her attempts to speak to her niece were incredibly frustrating, and watching as she basically offered to trade one child for another had turned her stomach. Cersei telling her that if she could ensure Jon didn't take Tommen to Squire, that maybe Myrcella could foster at Casterly Rock, that she could see the wheels turn in Cersei's head as she spoke, only making it even worse, as it was clear she meant none of what she said. So when the note had come, she'd gotten ready quickly, and along with Daisy and Ashara, had taken the carriage to the manse, wondering what Olenna had called the meeting for. Jenna had enjoyed the last one, and she and Daisy had spoken about the potential for what they may be able to do with them in the future, both women coming up with very different plans for things that Jon and Margaery should address. "Ladies, if you'll follow me," a servant said when she climbed from the carriage. They didn't have far to walk, and Alry and Olenna were already waiting for them, Jenna missing the ones who weren't there. Lady Mage had been blunt and to the point, and she'd liked that, and Linnacy too had shown her own cleverness, while Ilaria was far different than she'd expected. As she sat, she wondered if they would need to bring more into their little group. Would Margaery join them in the future, and who else could be brought in that had something to offer? "Ladies, please sit," Alary said. And soon they were drinking tea and speaking pleasantries before Olenna brought that all to a halt. "Enough of this silly talk. It's time we got to the real reason for being here," Olenna said, and Jenna chuckled. "As you say, Olenna, and that reason is?" she asked. "That Doran Martell tried to have my granddaughter killed," Olenna said, and hers was probably the loudest gasp of all. "You must be mistaken, he would not," Ashara said, and Jenna nodded her agreement. "Tyrion and Arianne are to be wed." "Olenna, what reason would Doran have for attacking Margaery?" she asked. "Dorne is with Jon, are they not?" Daisy asked, and Ashara told her they were. "Ashara! You know the man who tried to kill my granddaughter, your cousin Sir Gerald. Do you think he did so for coin? Or that he just randomly decided to attack Margaery?" Olenna asked. "No. Alaric has spoken of him as a man not to be trusted, but no coin. I doubt as to the reason. Both Arthur and I have been unable to come up with a motive for why he'd attack her." Ashara said. "What makes you think Doran is that reason?" she asked, and Olenna took a sip of her tea. "Jon," Olenna said, and then looked at them each before continuing. "Jon is king with Margaery as his queen. Gives Doran no benefit. I know you may say he would do it to see Robert fall, but Doran is not his brother. Oberyn may think of such a thing, but Doran does not. He seeks his blood on the throne, and Margaery stands in the way of that." "You think he'd have sought Arianne and Jon?" Daisy asked. "I know he would," Olenna said. "But he agreed to marry her to Tyrion," she said, and Olenna looked to her, and she could see that she didn't wish to speak more. Olenna, think like Doran, Jenna. You have to support Jon. Oberyn does. A letter from your sister says it's so. Jon has the West, the North, the Reach, and dragons. Jon will be king. Yet you wish your blood on the throne. What's in your way? Margaery, Daisy said for her. Margaery, so you see her dead, and Jon must continue his line. So who better than Arianne? Olenna said. And Tyrion, she asked, seeing it more clearly. A king trumps a Prince Jenna, Olenna said. This makes no sense. Why agree the match with Tyrion? What offer did he make Gerald? Ashara said. And Jenna found herself wondering the same thing. If you can't kill Margaery, then there is another way, Mallory said. Jon, she said, and Olenna looked to her before nodding slightly. I believe I'm right, and Doran is responsible, and I wish for nothing more than to see him dead. But I cannot. It must be Jon, and I know not how to tell him this. Olenna said. Is Margaery protected? Well protected? She asked. She is, Mallory said. Then we have time. I'll speak to Jon when it's right to do so. Are you sure? Olenna asked. I'm sure. We can't do anything here, and I'll talk to him. If Doran can't get to Margaery and sets his sights on Jon, it gives us time. Nothing can happen until Jon is crowned, she said, and the others seemed to agree. Jon came to her later that night, telling her of the conversation with Myrcella, and she almost kissed him when he said that once they had her in Casterly Rock, that was when they'd move. It gave them a few moons, and Tyrion would be back by then also, and Jenna would need to speak to them all about what Doran was planning. She almost went to Kevin that night, and at dinner she was both quieter and more snippy with Emmon than usual. It was the same the next day, and it was on the day after, when they were sailing from King's Landing, that she felt herself relax and calm down some. Emmon almost stunned when she didn't reprimand him as he slurped his soup on the Lady Joanna as she sailed. Looking to Jon when they were standing on the deck one evening, she wondered if perhaps it was for the best, if they took care of Doran themselves. Then she discounted the idea. All his life he'd had people plotting against his family. She'd not be one of them. And besides, he was her family now too, she thought as he and Walder laughed when Joy said something to Tommen. Casterly Rock, 297 AC. 3 moons later. Jaehaerys Targaryen. The bird flew over the city, its wings barely moving as it looked at the red walls in front of it. Soon it was over the walls and resting on a ledge. As it looked down at the pikes and the heads that rested upon them, they'd fallen prey to a monster, and as the bird flew back into the sky, it felt itself alone once more, the presence that had been inside it, retreating away, and it wondered when he would return. Jay leaned against the tree with his eyes closed as he prayed to the old gods for the strength to see this through. The images of the heads on the pikes still fresh in his mind, and the anger bubbling just below the surface. Soon, though, he saw them standing in front of him, his mother and father smiling as Elia laughed, Aegon with his long silver hair with his sword out beckoning him forward. Come, Jay, spar with me, his brother said as he looked on. Not today, Egg. You can see how busy your brother is, Elia said, and Aegon put his sword away. Not today, little brother. Jay heard the voice from behind him and felt her hand on his shoulder. He looked up to see her long brown hair as it blew in the wind, her deep purple eyes looking down on him as she laughed. Looking again to the rest of his family, he was glad she was with him. What he had to do he couldn't do alone, and he needed Rainix by his side. Go. You have work to do. We'll see you soon, his mother said, but not today, his father said with a smile as Jay opened his eyes to look at the tree in front of him. Not today, he said softly as he stood up and turned to walk from the godswood. They stood there in their white cloaks, 5 men ready to die for him, ready to kill for him, and he nodded to them and the men who stood to one side. Tyrion wore black and red and a small silver crown, his uncle looking every inch a dragon. Jaime wore crimson and gold and the hand-shaped pin proudly on his chest. As he walked towards them, he looked to see the ravens take off, each of them carrying a message to every lord in the land, and one to a monster who sat the Iron Throne. Your Grace, Jaime said as he handed him the crown. Lord Hand, he said as he put it on, and they walked into the rock. The halls were full of servants, and he saw Kevin and Jenna up ahead, Garion, Ashara, and Daisy by their side. In his hand he carried the scroll which had set it all in motion. The words burned deep into his brain, and though he had no need to carry it, he did. Lord Jaime Lannister, His Grace Robert Baratheon demands that the bastard Tommen Waters is to be delivered to the Red Keep to face judgment for his treason. Jon Arryn. Hand to the king. No. He had no need to read it, and it was why the banners had been called. That they'd fight for their liege lord was not in doubt, and yet it was not enough. He needed them to fight for him, and so he'd given them the choice and retreated to the Godswood to ready for their verdict. Arthur opened the door and he walked in. The black and red he wore even more pronounced than his uncle's. On his hand he wore the ring that had once belonged to an unlikely king. On his breast he wore the pin his wife had gifted him that matched the one she wore. The crown on his head was the Conqueror's and the sword on his hip, his Visenya's, and he finally felt the way he always should. He was a dragon and a wolf, and yet today he felt only one of those things, and as he sat down he looked out to the lords of the West, eager to see if they were ready to follow a dragon to war. My lords, you've had time to make your choice, and I'll say no more than this. A monster sits the throne and has done unspeakable things. Were I not who I am, then under my hand you'd march for justice and vengeance. I, too, march for both these things. But I seek to also right a wrong 5 and 10 years in the making. Under a lion or a dragon we march, my lords. So what is your choice? Jay said to loud noise and words being shouted. It was Lord Roland Creakhall who stood up, the man looking every bit as large and imposing as ever, and the hall soon quietened down. 8 years ago you came to us, and I, like others, questioned our liege lord's intent. To name a bastard as his squire was no mean feat. So we tested and poked and prodded, and over time, there's not a man in this room who didn't come to respect you, be it for the things you did to improve the West or the feats you did on the tourney grounds. Jay looked around as men began to nod in agreement. I never cared for the dragons nor the stags. What did they ever do to help the West? What care they for me and mine? I've never known a good king or one who even bothers to think of anyone but himself, so maybe it's time the realm had one, I say. Jay looked to the hall to see the tabletops being hit with fists and the sound of men stomping their feet. I know the man who sits the throne is not one, and I know the man who sits in this hall will be. So I'll ride with you, I'll fight with you, and I'll see you crowned, Jaehaerys Targaryen, the king from the West, Lord Creakhall said loudly. The king from the West. The other lords began to say, and the room began to shout it loud. The king from the West. The king from the West. Yet above it all, Jay could hear her as she flew over the rock, her roar louder than any, and Jay hoped they could hear her all the way to King's Landing. He hoped that Robert could hear, and Jon Arryn, and anyone who dared step in his way. As Rainix roared again, Jay smiled. We're coming for you, and we bring fire and blood.